Those years I was a mutant in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51 Katie's Harvest. Stryker quickly sank into the shadow, but no matter how fast he was, it would take time. In response, Wheeler only had time to snap his fingers. But that was enough. Snap, with a crisp sound, the energy ropes that bound Stryker exploded instantly. Boom. Amid the fierce explosion, a head flew up, and his face was still full of disbelief. Snap. The head fell to the ground like a discarded ball. The ink-like shadow on the ground suddenly rippled, and as a figure emerged from the shadow, pieces of blasted human tissue spurted out of the shadow on the ground like garbage. Ignoring the spurting flesh and blood, Wheeler's eyes fell on the expressionless man. The man was tall and thin, with pale skin without a trace of blood. The shadow under his feet twisted gently as if it were alive. What Wheeler cared about was that there was a number on the back of the man's hand, 005. Is this the strongest mutant weapon under Stryker's command? Wheeler narrowed his eyes, and the unlimited defense was quietly deployed. The man turned his head to look at Stryker's head, and as if the machine was activated, he directly attacked Wheeler. Whoosh! Two red beams of light shot out of the man's eyes without warning and swept towards Wheeler. Wheeler's eyes flashed, and blue energy rose from the ground, forming an energy shield to block the opponent's attack. Sizzle! The red and blue energies collided and annihilated each other. Suddenly, the red beam of light surged, shattered the energy shield, and continued to shoot at Wheeler. Fortunately, Wheeler was prepared for this, and another new energy shield appeared to block the opponent's attack. At this moment, the shadow behind Wheeler began to twist as if it was alive, and a person who looked exactly like the man jumped out of the shadow, and the arm that turned into a metal blade stabbed Wheeler's heart. Clone? Wheeler raised his eyebrows slightly, and another energy shield appeared behind him, blocking the attack for him. At the same time, the energy spear emerged from the ground and pierced the man's clone through the heart. The clone twisted and disappeared. Wheeler smiled slightly. Unlimited defense was so useful in preventing sneak attacks. But the next second, the smile on his face froze. Figures appeared one after another from behind 005, as if they were copied and pasted. Fuck, Wheeler cursed, and energy cards flew out one after another. At the same time, the battle on Logan's side had come to an end. After Poppy and Colossus changed opponents, the situation was reversed instantly. Poppy's hands were filled with frost power, and pieces of broken ice blades flew towards the Flame Man, who had flames and strong melee ability as he slapped. The Flame Man dodged like a gymnast, using all kinds of incredible moves. Murat seized the opportunity and spit out more a ball of fire the moment the Flame Man landed. The Flame Man twisted his body and disappeared in his own shadow. Seeing this, Poppy did not hesitate at all and sprayed frost at the shadow behind Murat. The Flame Man jumped out of the shadows and was immediately hit by Bobby's attack. His body was instantly covered with a layer of frost and his movement suddenly stopped. The next second, a bloody mouth bit his head with a crisp sound. Seeing this scene, Bobby shuddered. Murat spit out the head in his mouth with disgust and looked at the fight of others. Almost at the same time, Jean and Peter also ended the fight. After Peter turned into metal, he used his body to block the laser that threatened Jean and rushed towards the enemy. At the moment when Peter tore open the opponent's defense field, Jean seized the opportunity to use telekinesis to twist the head of the turret man. On the other side, the battle between Logan and the Death Girl fell into a stalemate. They both have self-healing ability and adamantium claws. Although the battle is very bloody, no one can actually kill anyone. At this moment, the attacks of others arrived. The invisible telekinesis bound the Death Girl in place, and violent lightning fell on the Death Girl. Crackling. The body of the Death Woman was shaking crazily, and wisps of black smoke came out of her body. Logan quickly dodged, looking at the grim-faced Jean and Ororo, and swallowed subconsciously. Ororo dispersed the lightning, looked at the Death Woman who was black and shaking from the electric shock, and noticed that her injuries were recovering quickly, and frowned. This won't kill her. Adamantium and self-healing ability made the Death Woman not afraid of injury, and her body could not be destroyed. Jean's eyes flashed, and she looked at Poppy and said, "Freeze her." Poppy nodded, pointed his hand at the Death Woman, and frost gushed out. Soon, a piece of ice with a diameter of several meters appeared in the original place, and the Death Woman was like a bug in amber. Poppy breathed a sigh of relief and said to everyone, "It shouldn't come out." "Well done," Logan praised and patted Poppy's shoulder lightly. "Where's Wheeler?" Ororo asked with a frown. "Fuck. I forgot. He should have been attacked by that illusion master, and was led away by the illusion," Logan explained, chasing in the direction where Wheeler disappeared. Everyone hurriedly followed. At the same time, Katie, who had disappeared since entering the base, was typing frantically in front of a computer. When she was looking for clues based on the design drawings of the base, she accidentally found this room. After confirming that this was Stryker's private room through the things in the room, she knew that she had found the right place. Sure enough, she found evidence of Stryker's human experiments on this computer. In addition, she also found a lot of useful information. For example, the ability statistics of those shadows, who supported the experiments here, and so on. The most important thing is that she found the people in this base, and the secret of why they could block the professor's telepathy. "This information will definitely scare others," Katie muttered, copied the information into the USB flash drive she carried with her, and destroyed the information in the computer. She didn't want these things to be used by bad guys again. After getting all the information, Katie stretched and gave herself a full score for this action. What is this? Just then, she opened the drawer under the computer desk and saw a black leather notebook. Isn't it a diary? It's hard to imagine that such a terrible person still has the habit of writing a diary, Katie muttered and opened the notebook. The more she looked at it, the uglier her face became. She closed the notebook with a pale face after reading only a few pages. The things recorded in the notebook were very messy. The experimental inspirations, the feelings when dissecting a certain experimental product, and some messy information were recorded casually. "This thing is also very important. Take it back to school." Katie took a deep breath, put the notebook away, and pressed the communicator to say, "Everyone, how are you? I'm done here, and I found something very useful. We are fighting. The enemy is very powerful." Bobby replied briefly, looked at the cross-fired lasers, and hurriedly lay on the ground. He looked up at the battlefield where the lasers were intersecting, and felt his scalp tingling. He didn't expect that after they found Wheeler, they would encounter such a troublesome enemy. Chapter 52 MVP Iceman. The sound of fierce fighting rang out in the base. The passage originally used for fighting had been destroyed. Even after Logan and his team joined the battlefield had expanded more than 10 times in constant movement. Clone, laser, shadow jump, control of shadow, self-healing ability, super strength. So far, 005 has demonstrated several abilities. If it were just that, it would not be a big deal for Wheeler and his team. But the key is that these abilities can be shared by clones. 005 and his dozen clones use shadow jumps to flash continuously on the battlefield, and each jump would shoot out a laser beam. For a time, red beams crisscrossed the battlefield, forming a deadly firepower network. Wheeler and the others dodged the lasers one after another, and even when dodging, they had to be careful of the shadows around them and their own shadows. A clone of 005 jumped out of Bobby's shadow, his eyes flashing red. At the same time, Bobby's shadow also wrapped around Bobby's legs like a rope, fixing him in place. Poppy's face turned pale. Just when he was about to be hit, energy cards fell on 005's clones and blasted them away. Fortunately, 005 can only control one person's shadow. If he could control several people's shadows at the same time, they would be in danger. "Be careful," Weller shouted to Poppy, and he felt a headache watching the 005s jumping around on the battlefield. Those clones were too flexible, and their melee ability was also very strong. They were even fearless. Every time they killed one, a new one would appear. It was as if they could not kill them all. On the contrary, they kept avoiding counterattacks, and there would always be times when they made mistakes and got into danger. "Area attack," Ororo shouted, and dazzling lightning appeared from her hands, jumping wildly in the air, and spreading around like an electric net. Seeing this, Weller's eyes flashed, and energy cards poured out from his hands, flying around as he waved his hands. At the same time, Poppy slapped out a large number of ice blades, Murat spit out a flame, and Jean's telekinesis formed an invisible net and captured it in one direction. Boom, boom. In the fierce energy collision, the clones were almost completely destroyed. But, only almost. Looking at the clones that emerged from 005 again, everyone felt a headache. At this time, they missed Professor X very much. Wheeler looked at Jean and was relieved to see that Jean's mood was stable. To him, Jean, who didn't know when to awaken her second personality, was like a nuclear bomb that could explode at any time. Of course, if Jean's ability was still the current Jean after awakening, Wheeler would be very happy to see it. Fuck. These things are disgusting, Logan cursed in a low voice, but there was a helpless look in his eyes. Wheeler pondered, we have to find a way to find the original body, or kill the original body and the clone at the same time. Jean? Can you find the original body with telepathy? Ororo looked at Jean and blocked a laser with lightning. No, Jean's expression was a little helpless. There was an inexplicable force in the entire base, which had been interfering with her telepathy. Murat and Logan shouted angrily, and rushed forward frantically after aiming at a clone. But boom! The dazzling red beam immediately blasted the two away. Peter caught Logan, turned around and blocked a laser beam with his back, with a look of pain on his face. In this battle, he had already blocked too many attacks for others. After creating an energy shield and blocking a laser beam, Wheeler shouted to Bobby, Bobby. Remember the technique I mentioned to you before? Bobby was stunned for a moment, and said uncertainly, Ice Mist. Yes, Bobby said anxiously, but I haven't fully mastered it yet. You have practiced well, believe in yourself, now is a good opportunity. Wheeler gave Bobby an injection of chicken blood, his eyes full of encouragement. Bobby nodded, I'll try. He took a deep breath, opened his hands, and a large amount of white ice mist sprayed out. In just a few seconds, the ice mist filled the entire battlefield. It was not difficult for Bobby to do this. When he was in school, he had already done this perfectly. But the next step was the key. Through the ice fog, capture the enemies in the ice fog. And use the ice fog to freeze them. A few seconds later, Bobby looked at the figures fighting in the ice fog and said anxiously, I can't do it yet. I can't control it so delicately. Wheeler shouted loudly, then freeze everyone, everyone? Bobby was stunned for a moment, gritted his teeth, and used all his strength to control the ice fog. A few seconds later, white frost gradually appeared on everyone. At this time, Wheeler shouted, everyone come to me. After everyone ran to Wheeler, Wheeler's eyes flashed and turned on unlimited defense. In an instant, everyone in the range was protected by a rich blue energy, blocking the lasers and frozen ice fog for them. Ah! Bobby roared, and the ice fog became extremely cold. Frost freeze. In just a blink of an eye, a layer of hard ice covered everyone. At this moment, the energy shield protecting everyone shattered, breaking the ice layer to restore everyone's ability to move, and turned into dense rain like sharp blades flying around, and the energy cards that had been prepared long ago also flew out from Wheeler's palm. The next second, when 005 and his clones' eyes lit up and were about to break the ice layer to restore their ability to move, the blue energy blades passed through their bodies, and the deadly energy cards directly cut off their necks. Puff, puff, 005's clones disappeared like bubbles, and 005's head fell from his neck. The next moment, flames and lightning fell on 005's body. After a few seconds, until 005 was confirmed to be dead and turned into ashes like other mutant weapons, the flames and lightning disappeared. Seeing that everyone was looking at her in fear, Ororo gently shook her hair and showed a charming smile. I just want to make sure everything is foolproof. Murat nodded in agreement. Haha, everyone laughed out loud. It's finally over. Logan exhaled and retracted his claws. Well done. Wheeler patted Bobby on the shoulder and praised, I see your progress. Bobby touched his head embarrassedly and said very sensibly, it's the captain who taught me well. If Wheeler hadn't helped him develop his abilities, he would only be able to spray ice like a faucet. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. I can't let you call me captain for nothing. What captain? Logan asked curiously. Bobby smiled and said, yes, it's X-Factor. Katie came out of the wall and shouted loudly, we are X-Factor, the second generation of X-Men. Brothers, cast your votes if you have them. Thank you very much. Chapter 53 Children are the future. Come on, follow me, it's here. According to the information I found in Stryker's computer, the mind blocker of this base is right below. We're here. Katie and the others stopped in front of a huge iron door. Ororo glanced at it and said, this door is open remotely, and it should be in the control room of the base. Before he finished speaking, Logan stabbed his claw into the door. Logan frowned. It's very thick. The adamantium claws were completely inserted, but still did not penetrate the door. It would take some time to open the door with the claws. Wheeler raised his eyebrows and looked at Katie. Katie grabbed Logan and rushed to the door. Hey, you want to fuck me? Logan's eyes blurred and he had already passed through the door. He looked at Katie in surprise. Is this your ability? It was the first time he saw Katie's ability. Katie smiled, but saw the things in this room, and then her face turned pale and her stomach churned. 3 people with shrunken lower bodies and large heads were soaked in nutrient solution. Their heads had no skulls, and their brains were exposed and connected to form a larger deformed brain. Some tubes were inserted into the brain, which looked very scary. At this time, the deformed brain was trembling slightly, but the 3 people did not react at all. Ugh, Katie covered her mouth and almost vomited. Logan turned Katie's body and said in a deep voice, "Bring them here." Yes. Ugh, Katie covered her mouth and used her ability to get out of the door again. After running a few times, Katie brought everyone into the room behind the door. Everyone looked at the deformed brain with a bit ugly face. Kin closed her eyes and felt it, and said with certainty, "This place has the strongest interference with mental power. This thing should be the so-called mental blocker. That bitch Striker is more disgusting than some terrorists." Murat's face was full of disgust. Many things he saw this time gave him a clearer understanding of the situation of mutants. Peter kept mumbling something, as if he was praying. "What is this?" Ororo picked up a cross-shaped thing that looked like a metal headband, but it was flashing blue light. "I know." Katie walked over and took a closer look. "This is a single-person mind blocker. She got a lot of information from those materials." Katie recalled and said, "There are not many of these things. It seems to help people resist the power of the mind by emitting a strange energy wave. However, if the enemy's mental power is too strong, it will be directly burned due to full operation." Bobby suddenly realized and said, "So, this is the confidence they dare to deal with this school." "Deal with this school?" Ororo's heart tightened and said, "What do you mean?" Weller pressed his forehead and said, "Stryker captured you to use you as bait to distract the school's power and then attack the school. Then let's go back quickly." Ororo began to worry. To her, the school is everything to her. "What should I do with this thing?" Bobby looked at the so-called mind blocker and felt uncomfortable. Logan said expressionlessly, "Let them be free." Everyone nodded in agreement. Murat blew out a fire and landed on the nutrient tank. Wheeler also threw out several energy cards. The explosion and fire destroyed the nutrient tank. During the whole destruction process, the deformed brain did not react at all, as if it was already a dead object, just a tool created by Stryker. After a while, when Jean felt that her telepathic ability was no longer disturbed and confirmed that this place had been completely destroyed, everyone left the base after destroying the surveillance records in the base. They left all the way without any obstruction. Even the surviving soldiers wanted to applaud on the spot after seeing them leave. At the same time, X school. Considering the safety of the students, after Wheeler and others left the school, Professor X asked Hank and Scott to take the lead and take the children out of the school with other teachers. Because the school has a brainwave machine, Professor X stayed very firmly. In the face of Scott and others' worries, Professor X smiled and said that he still had helpers, so they could rest assured and just protect the children. At this time, the X school was clean and tidy, as if nothing had happened, but from a few inconspicuous traces of battle and a large amount of ashes scattered on the ground, it can be guessed that there was a battle here. Compared with the battle of Wheeler and others, there were more mutant weapons attacking the X school. But on the contrary, the battle of the school was over almost instantly. In front of the school castle, Professor X looked at the sculpture in the destroyed fountain and pressed his eyebrows with a headache. This was the only large building destroyed in the battle. "What a pity. This thing has a history of hundreds of years," Professor X muttered, with a trace of heartache in his eyes. HMPH, a cold snort sounded from behind him. The gray-haired old man looked at Professor X with undisguised disdain and said, "You are still so stingy?" Professor X retorted, "It's not stingy. I just feel sorry for something I have had for so long, and it's destroyed just like that. You deserve it." Magneto's mouth curled up slightly, and he crossed his arms and sneered, "If you were with me, would there be so many troubles?" "Eric, you have to try to believe in the possibility of peaceful coexistence." "You? Okay, Charles," Magneto said impatiently, "don't say these meaningless words to me." The two were silent for a while, and Charles suddenly said, "Is Lorna okay?" "Of course. The child inherited my abilities and is a genius." Speaking of his daughter, Magneto grinned unconsciously, and suddenly said, "There are some good little guys in your school." Professor X smiled and nodded. "They are all good." Magneto suddenly bent down and said in Professor X's ear, "Tell me, if I take them away and let them join my career, you won't be angry, right?" Professor X said with a gentle expression. It is their freedom to make any choice, but they are all good children who have hope for the future. Magneto sneered. Oh, that's because they haven't seen despair yet, Professor X said lightly. No matter what time, we should have hope. You are an old stubborn man who can't make sense. Same here. After a few seconds of silence, Professor X suddenly said, you should leave, someone is about to come back to school. Magneto said dissatisfiedly, when you asked me to help, you didn't use this tone. Professor X smiled stupidly and said, that's because you know very well that the children in school are the future of mutants. Magneto snorted softly, slowly flew up, and quickly disappeared. Chapter 54 Codename, Dawn. Professor Scott rushed into the school, looked at Professor X sitting in front of the castle, and strode over. Professor X smiled and said, didn't I tell you to watch the children in the school? Professor, don't worry, they are safe now, Scott said, looking at the slightly messy campus and the destroyed fountain sculpture, and said nervously, is the enemy testing? After the test, it was a tough battle. It seems that he came in time. No, the battle is over, Professor X smiled and said, controlling the wheelchair to drive into the castle. Although there are many enemies with so-called mind blockers, for Magneto, it is just a matter of waving his hand. And without the mind blocker, those enemies are just a matter of a thought for Professor X. This battle is very easy for the two. Scott was stunned. His expression was a little incredible. The battle is over? Over? When the people on the Blackbird fighter plane knew the news, they were relieved, but also a little incredible. According to Scott, the battle in the school ended very quickly, as if no battle had happened, and basically no traces of the battle were left. According to Professor X, it was he who asked for reinforcements. Reinforcements? Everyone was a little curious about the reinforcements the professor was talking about, but they were more relaxed. For a moment, the tense atmosphere caused by worrying about the school was swept away, and the atmosphere on the Blackbird fighter became relaxed and happy. Ororo suddenly said, Willer, don't you want to explain why your team is called X-Factor instead of the second generation of X-Men? Wheeler raised his eyebrows and gave a look to the others in the team, indicating that everyone should speak together. Everyone looked at each other and took a deep breath. Because it's too ugly, Bobby shouted loudly, then his expression froze and he looked at the others in disbelief. You guys, Wheeler said with a serious face, this is what Bobby said, it has nothing to do with us. Peter showed a simple smile, that's right, how can you say it's ugly? Tut. Katie, who was flying the fighter, shook her head. Bobby wanted to cry but had no tears. Teacher, please listen to my explanation. Ororo's mouth corners slightly raised, but he said with a stern face, explanation? I don't want to hear any explanation. After a pause, when Bobby's face was full of confusion, he smiled slightly and said, you did a great job this time. Jean nodded in agreement and gently picked up her long hair. Speaking of which, we owe you one this time. Logan stopped Weller's shoulders and patted him twice. Thank you this time. This time, he not only recovered part of his memory and knew his original name, but also knew where his steel bones came from. Weller teased, when did you become so polite? Logan was stunned for a moment, and laughed and scolded, smelly boy. At this moment, Murat showed a sly smile on his face and said, while everyone is here, why not come up with a code name for Weller? Everyone was stunned, and they all looked very interested, especially the few people in the X-Factor team. Weller glanced at Murat calmly, from today on, you are no longer a member of the X-Factor team. Go back to your X-Men. Murat pouted, hey, are you still taking revenge? You are not suitable for X-Factor. You are too old? Weller shrugged and smiled, if you are taking revenge, I will not charge you from today on. And let you stay in the form of a beast. He just charged Murat once, strengthened his body, and made him enter the super body state. Murat's face became serious. I am superficial. Logan scratched his head and looked at Weller in confusion. Don't you have the code name of Prince Light Blast? Weller's face darkened. I don't. It's impossible. Don't talk nonsense. This code name is too bad. Prince? Light Blast? What's going on? Ororo asked curiously. Logan cleared his throat. Remember, Wheeler said helplessly, I'll buy you a drink. Although the code name is not a black history, these guys may really call him that in the future after knowing the origin. At that time, 3 meals, deal. Logan nodded with satisfaction, and was greeted with boos. At this time, Kin laughed softly and suggested, if you don't want others to randomly give you a code name, It's best to find one that you are satisfied with. That's right. Ororo nodded in agreement and couldn't help laughing. I remember that someone gave Scott the nickname of the one-eyed dragon. Ha ha ha. Katie couldn't help laughing. Kin's mouth curled up and said, and the professor was also called the wheelchair man. Logan laughed dryly. I just called him casually. I thought of it. Murat suddenly said, how about calling it Dawn? Wheeler said helplessly, why haven't you given up yet? Murat grinned, how about it? Isn't it very good? Damn it. He couldn't say that he regretted giving himself a code name but couldn't go back on it, so he wanted to drag Wheeler into the water. Not bad, Ororo praised. Wheeler shrugged, it's up to you. The matter of Wheeler's code name came to an end. Knowing that the school crisis was over, everyone relaxed their minds. The fatigue of the battle swept over them, and soon some people began to doze off. After seeing this, Katie drove the fighter plane more steadily. SHIELD, Trident headquarters. Nick Fury sat in his office, looking at the latest intelligence sent to him. Although his face had no expression, he was surprised in his heart. Stryker died, the mutant weapons in the secret base were all killed, and even the mutant weapons that attacked the school were cleaned up. The power of the school is greater than he imagined. However, this is also a good opportunity for him. Maybe he can add a few more Avengers. After all, it is a troublesome thing to finish these things, and they are professionals in SHIELD. You need it. I happen to be professional, and then I can get the benefits. That's how Tony Stark came to be. Thinking of this, Nick Fury smiled slightly. It looks like he has to go to X school tomorrow. Ding ding. His phone rang. After picking up the phone and listening to Natasha's mission report on the 10 rings, Nick Fury responded, asked Natasha to take a break, and hung up the phone. Helping Tony to deal with the 10 rings was also one of the conditions for Tony to join the Avengers. As they investigated the 10 rings, they found that they really underestimated this terrorist organization at the beginning. This organization is very large, and it participates in almost all criminal activities such as illegal arms trafficking, terrorist attacks, assassinations, and human trafficking. But what Nick Fury cares about most is the virus that Tony mentioned. I remember Tony said that a mutant who was injected with the virus joined X school. Nick Fury pinched his chin and muttered. It looks like he has to go to X school. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55, each shows his magical power. Facing the setting sun, the Blackbird fighter plane seemed to be covered with the golden light, carrying Wheeler and the others back to X school. Professor X and Scott, who had received the news in advance, smiled as they watched the group of people coming down from the fighter plane. Jean, Scott excitedly went up to them and hugged them tightly. When he knew that Jean and the others were missing and might even die, he was really scared. Jean patted Scott's back gently and smiled. I'm back. Scott looked at Jean's face and couldn't help but kiss her deeply. Jean patted Scott gently, her face slightly red. The children are watching. Scott laughed, turned his head to look at Wheeler and the others, and a smile suddenly broke out on his serious face. He nodded gratefully. Thank you this time, huh? Bobby, Katie and Peter all breathed a sigh of relief. Scott's serious expression made them always think that they had done something wrong. Professor X looked at everyone with a face full of satisfaction. Kids, you did a great job. Wheeler chuckled and rubbed his fingers. Professor, is the reward for this mission generous? Hearing this, Professor X was stunned for a moment, then smiled happily and reached out to touch Wheeler. Professor, I made you worry. Ororo's face was full of apology. Professor X waved to Ororo, and after Ororo walked to him and squatted, he gently stroked Ororo's smooth silver hair and said softly, it was my negligence that made you suffer. To him, the first batch of students of X school were like his children. Ororo's eyes reddened and he shook his head gently. Hey, everyone, you don't want to stay here until dinner is over, do you? Logan said helplessly, habitually touched his pocket, and found that there was no cigarette in his pocket, and a look of pain flashed across his face. Jean's stomach rumbled at the right time, and then her face flushed slightly. She explained, we haven't eaten for 2 days, Murat said loudly. Everyone, I suggest a celebration. Everyone agreed. Professor X looked at everyone with a smile, a smirk flashed in his eyes, and said, let's go to the kitchen and make whatever you want to eat. Weller narrowed his eyes and caught the blind spot. "Make it yourself," Scott explained. "Because of the attack, everyone else in the school has temporarily left the school." Logan had a painful expression, feeling that his stomach was about to digest him, and exclaimed, "Even the chef left." Professor X sighed and said pitifully, "Before you came back, it was just Scott and I thought we were going to starve." Katie jumped and raised her hand, suggesting, "How about we each cook a dish? It will be ready soon." Professor X praised, "Good suggestion. This is the only way." Bobby also looked helpless. Murat clapped his hands and urged, "Hurry up. Get moving, everyone. If you don't want to starve to death here." Everyone nodded, but Ororo muttered with a dark face, "I would rather starve to death." Passing through the quiet campus, everyone walked into the school kitchen. The school has 3 kitchens. One is located in the school cafeteria, and the other 2 are in the castle. One is for teaching, and the other is for some teachers. Yes, there are cooking classes in X school, and there are many people who like it. When they came to the school kitchen, except for Professor X who was unable to move, the rest of the people immediately got busy. For a while, it can be said that everyone showed their magical powers, and demons danced wildly. And Ororo was that demon. She was a kitchen blind, the kind that couldn't tell the difference between sugar and salt. So, after seeing everyone moving, she also bit the bullet and started cooking. However, compared with others, her cooking movements were a little bit wrong. Screaming, smoke, and even lightning made the X-Men in whose kitchen extremely scared, fearing that Ororo would blow up the entire kitchen without paying attention. Seeing this scene, Professor X quietly drove his wheelchair away from the kitchen where Ororo was. Although he couldn't move, he planned to make a pot of good tea and a pot of strong coffee. He was definitely not afraid of being blown away. At the same time, the kitchen where the X-Factors were was very harmonious. Because Murat had been kicked out of the young team of X-Factor by Wheeler, there were only Wheeler and 4 others in the kitchen. What Wheeler didn't expect was that the cooking skills of Bobby and the other 2 were unexpectedly good, and it could even be said that he opened his eyes. Colossus Peter was making beef balls, waving his metal fists, and in just a moment, the beef was smashed to pieces. Bobby held a sharp ice knife and cut sashimi. Each piece of meat was covered with a layer of crystal clear frost, which was delicately arranged into an iceberg by him. This scene made Wheeler think he was watching a food anime. Compared to the 2, Katie was much more normal, cooking a pot of mushroom cream soup. After coming to his senses, Wheeler began to prepare his own dishes, and a look of nostalgia flashed in his eyes. Mapo tofu, kung pao chicken, and a cola chicken wing. Soon, Wheeler prepared 3 home-cooked dishes. "Wow! You made 3. You are worthy of being the captain," Katie exclaimed, holding the soup and grinning. "I made it too. We made it too." Bobby smiled and picked up his plate of iceberg that was emitting cold air. Peter said worriedly, "I don't know if my meatballs are delicious." "It looks delicious." Katie's eyes flashed with amazement, and then she whispered to Wheeler, "Let's go." "They are 2 monsters." Wheeler nodded in agreement, and after the blue energy formed a dinner plate, he took his own dishes and left quickly with Katie. When they came to the restaurant in the castle and saw the dishes made by the X-Men, they realized what a real monster is. There was a dish of something that looked like meat, made of unknown ingredients. It couldn't help but emit black smoke and had a terrifying green-purple appearance. Wheeler asked in amazement, "Which genius made this?" "Genius? Do you really think the one who made this dish is a genius?" Ororo looked at Wheeler in surprise. Wheeler said seriously, "Well, it's probably enough to poison Stryker." "Ororo, ha ha ha." Logan laughed and put the salad on the dining table. Ororo looked at Logan expressionlessly. "Eat it later. Don't waste it. It won't poison you anyway." "Logan, puff." "Haha." Murat patted Logan on the shoulder and put a plate of fried fish on the dining table. Then, Kin brought a dessert and Scott brought a plate of barbecue. They were originally very satisfied with what they made, but after seeing the dishes made by Wheeler and others, they couldn't help but sigh. The gap is quite big. Chapter 56 Information Loss. "You guys are really quick." With Professor X's unique gentle voice, Professor X appeared in front of everyone in a wheelchair, holding a pot of tea and a pot of coffee. Professor, come here, it's about to start." Everyone greeted Professor X. Professor X smiled and put the tea and coffee on the table. He looked at the dishes of different styles, and his expression was a little surprised, but after his eyes looked at Ororo's dish, his face stiffened unconsciously. "Hey, they're all well done." Professor X touched his conscience and felt a little pain. Everyone, sit down and eat quickly. Don't really faint from hunger. The school won't compensate you when you die, Professor X joked, but winked at Wheeler. Wheeler's eyes jumped and he said in surprise, Professor, how do you know what I think? Professor X pointed to his head and joked, don't you know that you are very smart? Ha ha ha. Everyone laughed and sat at the table. Wait, Logan shouted, bent down and took out bottles of beer from under the table, grinning, since it's a celebration, how can there be no beer? Great. I was just going to say that. Murat gave Logan a thumbs up. Bobby, help me. Logan pointed at the beers. Bobby nodded, pointed his palm at the beers, and a ball of ice mist appeared from his palm, covering the beers. Seeing this scene, Professor X was a little surprised and said, Bobby, your ability has improved a lot. Bobby smiled embarrassedly, it's the help of the captain. Professor X looked at Wheeler, his eyes full of praise. Wheeler smiled and said, Professor, someone will soon starve, then let's eat. As Professor X's voice fell, the dining table turned into a battlefield, and the speed did not slow down until Logan and his friends were half full. After a while, except for Ororo's plate of abstract food, all the plates were clean, and the dishes made by the X Factor team received unanimous praise. The corners of Ororo's eyes twitched, and he whispered, I will never go into the kitchen again. I agree. Logan immediately agreed. Ororo looked at Logan expressionlessly and snorted unhappily. Huh? So comfortable. Murat touched his stomach and squinted his eyes comfortably. After Jean used telekinesis to send the tableware into the kitchen, Professor X asked Jean to pour coffee or tea for everyone. Professor X took a sip of coffee leisurely, looked at everyone through the hazy mist, and said slowly, now that the stomach problem has been solved, let's talk about this matter now. After a pause, he looked at Katie, nodded to her, and said, Katie not only found evidence this time, but also found a lot of useful information and intelligence. With these evidences, Stryker's death will not be a problem. Katie's face turned pale, but she remembered some human experiment information she had seen. Seeing this, Wheeler gently shook Katie's hand. Don't be afraid. Katie took a deep breath and forced a smile to Wheeler. Professor X asked Jean to take out the laptop computer that she had prepared and check the USB drive that Katie had given him. Jean opened the USB drive and everyone's eyes fell on the screen. The screen scrolled slowly and everyone's expressions became ugly. First, there were reports on human experiments. Although no one looked at them carefully, there were hundreds or thousands of them, and each report represented a mutant that was decomposed into experimental materials by Stryker. After that, there were reports on the manufacturing technology of those mutant weapons and the people who provided financial support to Stryker. With these things alone, it was enough to send Stryker and those who supported him to prison. That bastard died just like that. It was really a bargain for him. Logan cursed in a low voice, feeling a little sorry that he didn't give the other party two claws. Professor X asked Jean to close the computer and whispered, I will make good use of these things and make those people pay the price. Although the voice was light, it was cold. Obviously, after seeing these things, Professor X's heart was far from as calm as his expression. After a few seconds of silence, Professor X took out a black notebook and smiled. Well, in addition to those heavy things, there are also some good news. He placed a black notebook on the table and tapped it twice. This is also what Katie found. It is Stryker's personal notebook. There are many useful things recorded in it. In addition to some disgusting delusions and experimental inspirations, it also records the locations of some bases. Ororo immediately said, Base? The base where mutants are imprisoned. Until now, she still couldn't care less about the disappearance of the mutant children in the Alkali Lake Dam base. Professor X nodded. This possibility cannot be ruled out, so these bases are your next mission targets. Hearing this, everyone nodded. In addition to these, Professor X paused and looked at Wheeler. Wheeler was a little surprised. Is it related to me? It should be related to you. Professor X's eyes flashed with a complex color that no one noticed, and continued, there are some numbers recorded on it, from 003 to 009, and each number represents an experiment. Hearing the number 003, Logan, Ororo and Jean looked at Wheeler fiercely. Wheeler's face was calm, while Logan's face changed slightly, and asked, what experiment? Will it cause harm to Wheeler? You can read it yourself. There's a lot of information. Professor X pushed the notebook out. Logan immediately pressed the notebook and opened it. Ororo and Jean looked at each other, walked to Logan, and looked down at the notebook. Experimental Project 003. The project that the gentleman is personally responsible for, no one else has the right to ask. Even if the gentleman is sleeping now, no one dares to touch this project. But rather than saying it is a project, it is better to say that it is a special experimental subject. It is because of his existence that some experimental projects from 004 to 009 were established through his blood samples. He is a special existence, very special. This is related to his ability. According to that gentleman, his ability is seeing this. Everyone hurriedly turned a page, but the next page recorded some information from 004 to 009. The information is incomplete, and some are just code names. But this is not what we want to see. What about 003's ability? Why is it gone? Ororo was a little crazy, feeling like a feather was teasing her heart. Professor X also looked regretful and said, it was torn off. Maybe Stryker felt that such critical information should not be left behind. Logan and others sighed with some regret. Professor, why do you care so much about 003? Katie couldn't help asking. After the voice fell, Logan and others' eyes fell on Wheeler. Wheeler calmly rolled up his sleeves, revealing the number on his forearm 003. Chapter 57 Activation. After dinner, the way everyone looked at Wheeler made Wheeler feel uncomfortable. Gentle, distressed, just like looking at a child who has suffered from pain and disaster. Wheeler was speechless. I don't remember what happened before, so I don't have any feelings about it at all. Don't look at me with that kind of eyes, that makes me creepy. Wheeler looked at everyone helplessly, looking at everyone with disgust. Ororo said gently, but this can't change the fact that you have suffered a lot, Captain. You are so strong. Katie looked at Wheeler with admiration. Wheeler's eyes twitched, and he said sincerely, the past 003 is dead, and now there is only Wheeler Bryan. This is the truth, because the soul has changed. But after hearing this, everyone had an expression of I understand everything, but I feel more distressed for you. Logan grinned and whispered to Wheeler, if you feel uncomfortable, go back to the dormitory and rest first. Wheeler touched his forehead helplessly, turned around and left quickly. Wheeler left the restaurant but did not return to the dormitory. He strolled alone in the campus, looking very comfortable. Because the students were not there, the school seemed unusually quiet. The silver moonlight fell on Wheeler like a veil, and Wheeler's mood became unusually calm. Those guys thinking of the scene just now, Wheeler couldn't help but smile and shook his head. Although everyone's concern was completely misplaced, their feelings were real. After all, the rising relationship points could not deceive people. Unconsciously, Wheeler's consciousness had sunk into the system. The world tree swayed gently, as if greeting Wheeler. He looked at the statistics next to the world tree. Current world points. 2,210. World point growth rate. 225/day. World point source. 20. The number of relationships has not changed, but the number of world points obtained per day has increased from the original 195 to 225. Logan contributed the most to this value, because the relationship between the two broke through from the friendship stage to the next stage, close friends. The growth rate of relationship points has changed from 30/day to 50/day. In addition to Logan, Scott and Beast Hank also changed their relationship from stranger to friendly, and 5/day became 10/day. Seeing the improvement in his relationship with Hank, Wheeler couldn't help laughing. He thought that it would be very difficult for Hank to improve his relationship with him because of the Chinese class, but he didn't expect that he would break through so quickly. Moving his eyes downward, Wheeler's eyes fell on the event point. Existing event points. 710. Event point source. 0. The event point has not changed. Wheeler was a little surprised. He originally thought that in this operation, the event point would come out to make trouble again, giving the enemy a death mutation or something. But now it seems that the triggering of the event point seems to be irregular. By the way, will this event point have other uses? This broken system doesn't have a clear instruction manual. Wheeler muttered. A breeze blew, and Wheeler came back to his senses, only to find that he had unknowingly come to the small lake of the school. The moonlight flickered with the undulating lake surface, like a shattered dream, just like Wheeler's mood at the moment. He was still thinking about the missing page of the notebook. The most critical information was lost. And Wheeler would never believe that it would be such a coincidence. Perhaps, he should ask the professor. Wheeler had an idea in his mind, but he was a little hesitant. Forget it, don't think about it for now, Wheeler looked into the distance, recalling the information about his abilities that he had received from Stryker. Fusion of abilities, mutation and evolution of abilities? Since it is a mutation, there are both good and bad. Taking the risk of absorbing other people's abilities to make your current abilities undergo new mutations, it doesn't seem very reliable. If the ability evolved, it would be fine, but if the ability weakened, he would not have time to cry. He would never believe that the luck of people who could only draw the guaranteed minimum when playing games to draw character cards was good. Resolutely resist the behavior of gambling dogs. However, Wheeler suddenly remembered something, and his face became a little strange. It seemed that there was more than one way for him to get new abilities. If the ability is obtained from the system, will it also cause mutation of abilities? Wheeler had an idea in his mind. At present, the only ability he got from the system was primary self-healing, and the other rewards were either combat skills or improving one's own energy control. So it seems that nothing will happen. Wheeler felt the blood in his body boiling, and said in surprise, it was activated. Just as he was thinking about the ability of evolution and fusion, the dormant ability seemed to be activated and began to merge with a primary self-healing ability. No way, what do you fear will come? Wheeler's mouth twitched. But the ability fusion has begun and can't be stopped. At this moment, Wheeler suddenly found that the world tree in his mind shook twice, and the huge crown emitted a little emerald green light. The next second, the boiling blood calmed down. What's going on? Wheeler was stunned for a moment, and then his expression was a little strange. Was it the system that took action just now? However, Wheeler could clearly feel that his self-healing ability still existed and there was no change, but his alien energy had changed a little. A blue light appeared on Wheeler's hand, and it was gently scratched on the palm, leaving a bleeding wound. The self-healing ability began to work, and the wound began to stop bleeding. According to Wheeler's estimation, it would take at least a few minutes for the wound to recover. But now Wheeler's mind moved, and another blue light appeared in his hand. Unlike the previous one, this blue light made people feel very warm and full of vitality. Wheeler pressed the blue light on the wound. The blue light penetrated into the wound, and the wound began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although it is still not as fast as Logan's self-healing speed, this ability can be used by others. Wheeler was stunned. What's going on? Wheeler recalled the abnormality of the world tree just now, and his expression became strange. He muttered, could it be that the primary self-healing ability came from the system, so it triggered the system's counterattack, and then the current changes occurred? Although Wheeler was not sure, he could not find any other reason except this explanation. If this is the case, this result seems not bad. However, it still needs to be verified. Do you want to ripen a bronze fruit to see if you can open an ability and then verify it? Wheeler was a little tempted. No, this world point is for the first golden fruit. What bronze fruit? He doesn't care about it now. Wheeler drove the thought out of his mind with difficulty. At this moment, Professor X's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Whirl, is it convenient for you to come to my office? There is something you need to know. Come right away. Wheeler responded in his mind and turned to walk towards Professor X's office. Chapter 58 Information, Conversation. X's office. Professor X sat at his desk and turned to look at the moon outside the window. The soft light of the desk lamp fell on him, while the silver moonlight fell on his face, as if dividing him into silver and yellow. Hearing the sound of the door being pushed open, Professor X twisted his wheelchair and turned around, saying to Wheeler, turn on the light in the room, it's too dim. Wheeler fumbled at the door and turned on the light. The bright light illuminated the office, and Professor X closed his eyes somewhat uncomfortably. At that moment, Wheeler saw a trace of fatigue in Professor X's eyes. But the next second, when Professor X opened his eyes, he could only see deepness and gentleness in his eyes, just like the night sky in spring, which made people relax physically and mentally. Did he see it wrong? Wheeler was stunned for a moment and said, Professor, what do you want to talk to me about? As he spoke, he walked to the opposite side of Professor X, pulled out a chair and sat down. Professor X said gently, there are some things you should know. As he spoke, he took out a neatly folded paper from his jacket pocket, put it on the table and pushed it to Wheeler. Wheeler looked at the paper, and a look of realization flashed in his eyes. Sure enough, the page in the notebook that recorded his ability was torn off by Professor X. Was it to prevent his ability from being discovered by others? Wheeler felt warm in his heart. Seeing that Wheeler did not open the paper, Professor X smiled slightly. It seems that you already know your true ability. Wheeler nodded and said, I learned it from Stryker." Hearing this, Professor X nodded, with a hint of seriousness in his gentle expression. "I think it's best not to let others know your true ability before you are ready." Wheeler groaned. "Is it really that serious?" Professor X looked at Wheeler gently and smiled. "You already have the answer in your heart, don't you?" Many times, asking a question is not to get an answer, but to get information. Wheeler was silent. Professor X said quietly, "Infinite evolution. Other mutants are the food for your evolution. Do you think mutants will be afraid of you? And will humans like to see a mutant who can grow infinitely and possibly become a god?" Until now, he did not dare to expose his true power after using the brainwave machine, let alone the terrible ability of Wheeler. So, he tore off the paper. Wheeler's face changed, and suddenly said, "Then what do you think, Professor?" Professor X said seriously, "You are a good kid. This may be an opportunity for this world." Wheeler was stunned and understood what Professor X meant. Then he smiled and said, "Professor, don't joke." Professor X smiled and did not continue the topic. He changed the subject and comforted, "Don't worry, except for the gentleman mentioned in the notebook, only me and I know about your ability in the school." When Katie saw the inspiration of the previous experiments, she didn't dare to read on. That gentleman. Wheeler frowned, and was very concerned about this. Although Stryker's diary said that the gentleman was sleeping, he would wake up if he was sleeping. And the gentleman has done so many things, Wheeler never believes that guy's a good person. "We will investigate, but don't worry about it. He is sleeping now, which is also an opportunity for us, an opportunity to knock out all his experimental projects." Professor X's eyes flashed with a fierce look. Wheeler nodded. The professor was right. Professor X pushed the paper on the table again and smiled. "Take it away, deal with it yourself." Wheeler picked up the paper, and a blue light flashed on his hand. After a little energy was injected into the paper, it exploded into ashes. Professor X pressed his eyebrows and said to Wheeler, "Go and rest." Wheeler nodded and left quickly. When Wheeler opened the door and was about to leave, the professor suddenly called Wheeler. Stay the way you are now, don't lose yourself, and do what you want to do most, okay?" The next day, early in the morning, a heavy rain made the entire X school hazy. The children who left school yesterday and stayed in the hotel for one night were taken back to school by the school teachers one after another after confirming their safety at school. Ororo looked at the children who appeared on the campus one after another, feeling the school's increasing vitality, and a bright smile bloomed on his face. "This kind of weather doesn't match the good mood now," Ororo murmured, his eyes wide, and used his ability to disperse the dark clouds. The heavy rain stopped in a few seconds, and the dark clouds in the sky quickly dispersed as if they were pushed away by an invisible big hand. The bright sun fell, and a rainbow appeared in the school, like a dream. This scene was seen by Nick Fury, who happened to be near the school. He had no expression on his face, but sighed quietly in his heart. It's really a powerful force, and the X school seems to be getting stronger and stronger. Maybe this is a good thing for the world, but it's not good if there is no restraint. This thought flashed through his mind, and he felt that the Avengers' plan was becoming more and more urgent. "I hope I can reach a cooperation with some X-Men this time. It's best to be a younger, passionate, and responsible X-Men." Thinking of this, a name appeared in his mind. Wheeler Bryan. "Director, we're here," a man with a receding hairline said softly. Nick Fury nodded, got out of the car and looked at the agent driving, and said, "Coulson, come with me." Phil Coulson, a senior agent of SHIELD, one of the people Nick Fury trusts the most. "Me." Coulson pointed to his nose and said in surprise, "You've come here in person, what else do you want me to do?" Nick Fury's eyes flashed with a smile, and he said coldly, "When necessary, block bullets for me, Director, don't joke." Coulson smiled at Nick Fury, and then asked carefully, "Are you serious?" "What else? Then Martin or Natasha should come, otherwise, Hill can also do it. You are the most suitable," Nick Fury said lightly, turned around and said, "Follow me." Compared to him, Coulson's personality and a face that looks like a good guy are more suitable for things like negotiation and recruitment. The two came to Professor X's office. Nick Fury greeted the professor with a smile on his face, while Coulson looked at Professor X curiously. It was the first time he met this legendary mutant. The three sat down on the sofa in the office. Nick Fury smiled and said, "Professor, I didn't expect to meet again so soon." Professor X said directly, "Director Fury, just tell me, what are you here for this time?" Nick Fury's face straightened and said, I heard that you got Stryker's criminal evidence and some research materials. I wonder if the professor can provide us with a copy? Professor X looked at Nick Fury and suddenly smiled and said, okay, Nick Fury. His script was not like this. Shouldn't Professor X refuse, and then he would bring up the matter of the Avengers? Chapter 59 Need to Pay Extra. X's office, the atmosphere became subtle and awkward. Coulson looked at the two bald men sitting opposite each other and laughed wildly in his heart, as if he saw a flock of black crows flying over their director's head. X School might be able to hand over Stryker's evidence of crime to them, but those research materials would not be handed over so easily by X School. However, their main purpose was not these things, but to pull the X-Men into the Avengers. But now, they all estimated wrong? Coulson felt the stiff atmosphere between Professor X and their director and sighed softly. Sure enough, he was here to block the bullet. A smile appeared on his face and he said, Director, don't you have another important thing? Oh, yes. Nick Fury patted his forehead, his face full of distress. Look at my memory, I have forgotten too many things. He looked at Coulson. Explain it to the professor. The smile on Coulson's face froze, and then his face straightened. He opened the file bag he carried with him and placed a document in front of Professor X. Professor X watched the two people acting quietly. He did not pick up the file. Instead, he said gently, the criminal data at Stryker you just mentioned contains some people who cooperated with Stryker. SYNOPSIS will not let these criminals go, right? Nick Fury groaned. If they really committed a crime, they will get the legal sanctions they deserve. Professor X nodded and smiled. I believe Director Fury is a fair man. Some of the people in there are of high status. If X School wants them to pay the price, it will be troublesome for X School. If SYNOPSIS is involved, things will be much easier to handle. Coulson saw the scene and raised his eyebrows slightly. Good man. Professor X did not mention those research materials. However, the deadlock has been broken, and the next step is to talk about formal matters. Seeing Professor X pick up the document and start flipping through it, Coulson immediately said, this plan is called the Avengers, and it's a project created by our director himself. The purpose is to unite those who have powerful powers, form a team, and use their respective abilities to deal with larger enemies or organizations that are enough to threaten the safety of the entire world. Professor X praised, good idea. As he said that, he put the document on the table and smiled. So, your purpose of coming to X School is to recruit people? Coulson nodded and said, to be precise, I hope that the X-Men can join the Avengers. X-Men? Charles took a sip of tea leisurely, frowned and said worriedly, the X-Men are already very busy. What about you pulling them into the Avengers? What about us? Coulson explained seriously, the Avengers will only assemble when facing major threats. They don't need to be on standby or perform any ordinary tasks. It's a very free alliance. Charles nodded, but still looked worried. At this time, Nick Fury said, Professor, the Avengers can enjoy the intelligence of our shield. Professor X said lightly, well, not bad, although only a few X-Men were allowed to join. But the person who joined represented the X-Men. If the Avengers encountered trouble, they would definitely use the resources of the X School. Just by helping to punish the criminals in the Stryker incident, they wanted to get the resources of the X School for free in the future. Haha. Looking at this scene, Coulson's eyes jumped. Good guy. This Professor X almost wrote the words additional money on his face. Nick Fury's eyes sank, and suddenly said, I know that the government is setting up a mutant incident handling department recently. I can help recommend someone from the school to be the minister. Professor X smiled. Director Fury is sincere. It is much better for someone from the school to become a minister than for the government to launch a puppet. Nick Fury said seriously, what is the relationship between me and the professor? PY transaction? Coulson complained in his heart, but heard Nick Fury say to him, Coulson, bring us the list of people we prepared. Coulson nodded, put a list in front of the professor, and explained, we have selected several candidates based on their abilities, personalities, experiences, etc. Professor X took a look. Charles Xavier, Logan Howlett, Ororo Monroe, Hank McCoy, Wheeler Bryan. No Scott and Jean? Yes, Scott is tough and stubborn in action. It would be fine if Scott led the Avengers, but Nick Fury obviously didn't want to do that, so did he exclude Scott? As for Jean, compared to the others, her combat effectiveness seems to be a little worse. A thought came to his mind, and Professor X was surprised and said, am I also a candidate? Nick Fury nodded and said, "If the professor is willing to join and lead the Avengers, we will be very enthusiastic." He just wrote Professor X's name on it with the idea of just in case, but it should be I'd better forget it. "I'm too old and not suitable for these young people." Professor X smiled and refused, and then said, "As for Hank, he is the candidate for the Minister of Affairs, and he is not suitable to join the Avengers. I will call the others over. If they are willing to join, I have no objection." Nick Fury frowned and said, "Okay." A moment later, Wheeler and the other two came to Professor X's office. "Professor, what's the matter?" Ororo asked, but looked at Nick Fury and the other two in confusion. Professor X smiled slightly and said, "Let Director Fury and the others explain it to you." Nick Fury winked at Coulson, and Coulson smiled and said to Wheeler and the other two, "Hello, I'm Phil Coulson, and we came this time." As he said, Coulson told the three about the Avengers. Logan said impatiently, "What Avengers? I'm not interested." He had just recovered some of his memories and had no good feelings towards these official organizations. Ororo also said apologetically, "Sorry, I don't have time." The two rejected the invitation of the Avengers without hesitation. Wheeler pondered. Wheeler." Nick Fury stood up, smiled at Wheeler, and said, "Tony just joined the Avengers, and he kept mentioning you. He should have invited you to the Avengers, right? Good guy. If he can't take anyone away, wouldn't he be getting it for free?" Wheeler nodded. "Tony mentioned it," Nick Fury said loudly. "This is an opportunity that belongs to you and the mutants, the opportunity to become a superhero, let the world recognize mutants again, and prove to the world that mutants can become superheroes. You who want to do something for mutants will definitely not miss this opportunity, right?" Chapter 60 Socialite. Half an hour later, Nick Fury and Coulson left the X school. Although the result was not perfect, the purpose of coming to the school this time was achieved. At the same time, in Professor X's office, Logan looked at Wheeler and frowned. "Do you really want to join the Avengers?" Wheeler smiled slightly. "He is right. This is an opportunity to show the world that mutants can also be superheroes." Although he did not have such ambitious goals as Professor X and Magneto, as a mutant now, he did want to do something for mutants. Moreover, this is also a good opportunity to establish a lot of relationships. He is the best socialite, a social officer. Hearing Wheeler's words, Professor X looked at Wheeler with relief. He also thought this was an opportunity, but he could not ask the X-Men to participate in the Avengers plan. He was very relieved that Wheeler had this idea. Ororo pinched Wheeler's face and said with a smile, "Hey, our Wheeler is really a good boy." Wheeler slapped Ororo's hand away in annoyance. Ororo laughed happily. She found it quite fun to tease Wheeler. Logan looked at Wheeler seriously and said, "No matter what you think, you must be careful when you come into contact with the government. They are very dirty." Wheeler shrugged and smiled. "Aren't you here?" Logan grinned. "That's true." Half a month later, in Tony's mansion in Malibu, Los Angeles. "Oh, this feeling is so good." With a high-pitched cry, Tony's face was flushed and his whole body was refreshed to the extreme. "Sir, congratulations, you have found a new element." Jarvis' congratulations made Tony grin happily. He looked at the new reactor on his chest, and his body and mind were refreshed to the extreme. "SHIELD is still useful," Tony whispered, and disappeared without a trace when the development of the new reactor was completed because of his dissatisfaction with Nick Fury's invitation to join the Avengers. In order to deal with the 10 rings, he flew around the world in his iron suit. Although the name of Iron Man became more and more famous, it also bared hidden dangers for his body. Palladium poisoning. He had foreseen this situation, but he couldn't leave the Iron Man suit. So, the situation became more and more serious. Interestingly, in order to pull him into the Avengers, Nick Fury, after knowing that he was poisoned by palladium, used some research materials left by his father in S.H.I.E.L.D. as a favor, and reminded him that he might find a solution from those relics. He tried, and then he succeeded. Here, he had to praise his father, Howard Stark. "Dad, you are really a genius," Tony murmured, as if he saw another mustache smiling at him with satisfaction on his head. "Haha," Tony laughed softly, dispelled the illusion in his mind, and said, "Jarvis, start assembling a new Iron Man suit." While developing a new reactor, he also developed a new Iron Man suit. Tony pinched his chin and muttered, "Maybe it's time to find a time to fight with Wheeler." He still remembered the scene when he just developed the Iron Man suit, and Wheeler said lightly that he could turn him into human bomb. At this moment, Jarvis' voice sounded again. Sir, it's S.H.I.E.L.D. calling. S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony pressed his eyebrows and said, pick it up. Although he didn't like S.H.I.E.L.D. very much, S.H.I.E.L.D. had provided him with a lot of information about the 10 rings recently. Mr. Stark, a gentle voice sounded. It was Coulson. Tony's face was full of disgust. Coulson, why is it you? Can't it be Natasha or other beautiful agents? Coulson laughed, not angry at all. Natasha doesn't do this kind of communication work. Tony rolled his eyes. What's the matter? Coulson said quickly. We have found several bases of the 10 rings and have sent you the coordinates. Tony's face was full of joy. The opportunity to test the new Iron Man suit has come. Got it, Tony responded and hung up the call. Tony pressed the reactor on his chest and asked impatiently, Jarvis, how long will it take to assemble the new suit? Jarvis immediately replied, Sir, it will take 5 hours. Tony nodded and turned to leave the laboratory. There were still 5 hours left, so he could rest and get enough energy. Country M, New York. Wheeler and Bobby walked in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, occasionally talking on the communicator in their ears, looking for their target. A mutant girl had just awakened and had killed 3 people. This incident had caused a lot of impact. After Professor X knew about it, he specifically asked them to deal with it. But before they found the person, they were targeted first. Someone is following us, Bobby whispered to Wheeler, but there was some excitement in his eyes. After the last mission, his confidence soared. It's worthy of being Hell's Kitchen, Wheeler said with a smile, and then winked at Bobby. Bobby nodded and followed Wheeler into an alley. Seeing the two disappear, the gangsters following behind laughed sinisterly and chased after them. A moment later, with screams coming from the alley, Wheeler came out of the alley swinging a few wallets. Wheeler took out the cash from his wallet, threw away the wallet, took out half and handed it to Bobby, muttering, You are so poor, no wonder you want to rob money. Looking at the money handed over by Wheeler, Bobby shook his head. I don't want it. After a pause, he looked at Wheeler carefully. Why do I think you look very skilled? Not bad. Wheeler nodded, smiled and put the money away, saying, When I was hanging out with Logan, there were often generous people who came to give us money. Give money? You dug a pit for those poor bastards to fall into, right? Bobby complained in his heart. Wheeler squinted at Bobby. Young man, you seem to be saying bad things about me. I'm not. How dare I? You are our captain. Bobby shook his head frantically. Seeing Wheeler looking at him suspiciously, he immediately changed the subject and said, Captain, the news that we have established X Factor seems to have spread in the school, and many people want to join. Be more confident. Remove the word seem, Wheeler said with a headache. If I'm not mistaken, it should be Katie who spread it. The first person who applied to join him was Katie's good friend Lee Kyan-hoon. Then what are you going to do? Do you want them to join? Bobby asked curiously, because someone also asked him secretly. Don't worry about this. Even if you want to expand the enrollment, you still need to conduct an inspection. After speaking, Wheeler looked at the shabby hotel in front of him, pressed Bobby's shoulder, and said, We are here. The place where the professor sensed is here. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Chapter 61. Take from the people and give back to the people. Wheeler and Bobby walked into the shabby inn. The innkeeper was leaning on the counter, not noticing Wheeler and Bobby coming in. Wheeler knocked on the stained counter and wiped it on Bobby in disgust. Bobby, if Wheeler was not his captain, he would freeze the hand into a lump of ice. Shit, the fat innkeeper with a face full of flesh was startled, as if he was poured with a basin of cold water, and his mood was completely gone. He waited for Wheeler and Bobby, and said angrily, You? Wheeler took out a stack of money from his pocket, took out several from it and put them on the counter. The boss's face instantly smiled, wiped his hands on his pants twice, and held down the money. You look like a distinguished guest. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. I dare not stay in your place. The boss smiled awkwardly, but his eyes were fixed on the money in Wheeler's hand. Ask you a question, Wheeler said as he put the money on the counter. 1, 10, 20. Although the denominations were not big, the bills kept falling one by one, which was very tempting. Speak, please speak. The boss was a little unaccustomed to using the word please. There was a red-haired girl, who looked about 17 or 18 years old. Yesterday, room 211 on the second floor. Wheeler nodded with satisfaction, slapped the money in his hand on the counter, and sneered, If you don't find it, you have to pay double the money, boss. Don't worry, I've been watching the door. That little bitch, the girl, Hasn't come out since she went in. The boss smiled and hurriedly took the money in his hand. Wheeler nodded and walked upstairs with Bobby. Bobby looked at Wheeler in surprise. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. Why are you looking at me like that? That money, take it from the people and use it for the people. Bobby's mouth twitched. The two went up to the second floor and found room 211. Wheeler knocked on the door with a smile on his face. Do you need special services, Bobby? No. A hoarse voice came from the room. Wheeler raised his eyebrows and continued, okay, then I'll go in. Fuck. Don't you understand? No, the girl in the room shouted loudly. But the next second, the door was pushed open with a slight explosion. Seeing this scene, the girl's eyes shrank. If she was not mistaken, the lock of the room exploded? They are also mutants? A thought flashed through her mind, and the girl ran to the window without hesitation. Bobby, Wheeler shouted in a low voice. Bobby aimed his palm at the window, and a large amount of frost sprayed out. Just a few steps away, the window was frozen with a layer of hard ice. Fear flashed in the eyes of the red-haired girl, and she shouted, and an axe appeared out of thin air. As the girl swung it, it chopped on the ice. Ice chips flew everywhere, and a crack appeared on the ice wall. But as Poppy continued to spray frost, the crack soon disappeared. The girl looked at this scene in horror and yelled at Wheeler and the other man, "Don't come over." As she yelled, the axe seemed to be grabbed by an invisible hand and flew towards the two men. Wheeler flicked his finger, and a blue energy ball like a bullet collided with the axe. With an explosion, the axe disappeared. Before the girl could summon the second axe, Wheeler's eyes flashed with blue light, and he quickly appeared in front of the girl, with a blue blade pressing on the girl's neck. Fear appeared in the girl's eyes. And the axe that had just appeared disappeared. Can we talk? We don't want to hurt you, Wheeler said with a smile, dispersing the energy blade in his hand. Aren't you sent by those people? The girl asked in a low voice, and the fear in her eyes dissipated a little. Those people? Bobby asked in confusion. Who are they? Hearing Bobby's question, the girl breathed a sigh of relief, but hatred appeared in her eyes. The Chainsaw Gang. Chainsaw Gang? What is that? Wheeler raised his eyebrows. A lone shark gang. I thought you were sent by them to arrest me, the girl said nervously. Wheeler looked at the girl and suddenly said, you should still be in high school. Yeah, the girl nodded, but immediately said, but I'm about to graduate. Wheeler smiled helplessly. What's your name? Milan. Well, Milan, I think we can find a place to talk about your affairs. What do you think? Milan hesitated and said, okay, if these two people want to do anything to her, she can't resist. Half an hour later, Wheeler and Bobby took the girl out of Hull's kitchen, found a dessert shop, and ordered some food for the girl. Milan thanked him, and under the questioning of Wheeler and the others, she slowly told her story. In a car accident, Milan lost her mother and her father became a disabled person. After that incident, Milan also became introverted and inferior. So, she became the target of bullying by those bad kids. But there was a girl who always helped Milan and became her best friend. Although Milan didn't know why the girl helped her, she was extremely grateful because she was a ray of light in her bleak life. Once, Milan accidentally found some injuries on the girl's body. After she asked repeatedly, the girl told her that the injuries came from the girl's stepfather. The girl's stepfather was an alcoholic and gambler. As long as he was not happy, he would often take it out on the girl. After knowing the girl's story, the relationship between the two became closer. They both regarded each other as the white moonlight in their lives. They cheered each other up and looked forward to the future together. But a week ago, the girl died. According to the girl's stepfather, the girl committed suicide. Milan was hit hard, but when he was packing up the girl's belongings, he found the real reason from the diary left by the girl. At this point, Milan wiped her tears and choked up. It turns out that Grace has been often violated by her stepfather since she was in high school. Grace thought she could leave that hell when she came of age, but who knew that the devil would force Grace to use her body to pay off his gambling debts? Bobby gasped. What kind of devil is this? How can such a person be a father? Wheeler said lightly, how did she die? Milan wiped her tears, but more tears flowed out uncontrollably. Her stepfather owed the Chainsaw Gang a lot of money, and Grace's money came too slowly, so he sold Grace to the Chainsaw Gang, and then the Chainsaw Gang had her organs hollowed out. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Inspection Requirements. Damn it, Bobby cursed. The coffee in his hand had frozen into ice. Wheeler groaned, and said, "These should not be written in the diary, right?" "How did you know?" Milan said hatefully. "When I killed the demon, I forced him to tell me. Until now, she still wanted to kill that demon again." Wheeler glanced at the angry Bobby, coughed lightly, and said to Bobby, "Calm down." Bobby nodded and asked the girl, "Who did you kill?" Milan wiped away her tears and said calmly, "Grace's stepfather, the leader of the Chainsaw Gang who took Grace away, and the Black Doctor who took out Grace's organs." Wheeler raised his eyebrows. "Good guy, he killed quite a lot." Wheeler groaned. "Do you know the consequences of doing this? Have you thought about your father?" "I know." Milan nodded, pursed his lips, and pretended to be free and easy. "Isn't it just death at most? As for my father, he would be more relaxed without me, and he wouldn't have to work hard to raise me." Noticing the fear flashing in Milan's eyes, Wheeler laughed softly. "Child, you really can't lie. We already know what happened. Whether it is true or not, you need to go with us to verify it." After saying that, Wheeler put the money on the table and said to the bewildered Milan, "Come with me." Milan got up in fear and followed him. Seeing this, Bobby whispered, "Don't worry, I just take you to school to verify what you said. It won't hurt you." Milan asked carefully, "Verify? How to verify?" "You will know when you get there." School, medical room. After examining Milan's body and recording her ability, Kin used her ability to verify Milan's words. As a result, there was no water. After reaching such a conclusion, Kin's expression was a little ugly, and she looked at the child who was not yet an adult with heartache. "Thank you, Kin." Wheeler thanked him and took Milan out of the medical room. "Bobby, you report this mission to the professor, and let me handle Milan's affairs," Wheeler said to Bobby, and drove Milan out of the school. After asking for Milan's address, Wheeler sent him to the door of his house at nightfall. Wheeler opened the car door and said calmly, "Go home, just pretend nothing happened. I will find a way to help you settle other things." "No." Milan shook his head and gritted his teeth and said hatefully, "I will kill the leader of the Chainsaw Gang. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened." Wheeler rubbed Milan's head and smiled. "You have done enough. Think about your father. You are the spiritual pillar that he has tried to take care of even with his crippled body. What should he do if he loses you?" This is also the reason why Milan was not allowed to stay in school. Milan was stunned, and his father's face appeared involuntarily in his mind. "Woo!" She covered her face with her hands and sobbed softly. "Go." Wheeler handed over a tissue. Milan nodded and opened the car door, but asked carefully, "Will I really be fine?" "Don't worry." Wheeler nodded with a gentle expression and reminded, "By the way, don't show your ability unless it is absolutely necessary. It will bring you trouble." "Thank you." Milan thanked her gratefully. She stepped back from the car door, paused, and then ran home. Watching Milan return home, Wheeler drove away. A moment later, Wheeler's car appeared in Hell's Kitchen. "It's still more convenient to drive yourself," Wheeler murmured, with a smile on his face. The driver's license was obtained by the school, and the car was provided by the school. It feels good to get it for free. With a sigh, Wheeler called SHIELD on his mobile phone. The phone number was left by Nick Fury and Kelson when they left, asking him to contact them if he had any questions. Now, they are needed. However, Milan's matter should be very simple for them. When the call was connected, Wheeler smiled and said, "Coulson, are you having a good day today? I was in a good mood until you called me." Kelson laughed and teased, then nervously said, "Did something happen, Mr. Bryan?" "Nothing special. I just need your help with something. Please tell me." Wheeler pondered for a moment and told Kelson about Milan. After hearing this, Kelson breathed a sigh of relief and said easily, "This is easy. Then I'll trouble you. I'll treat you to dinner when I have time." Wheeler hung up the phone and stretched his body. "It's time to start working." Chainsaw Gang whispering in his mouth, Wheeler opened the car door, looked at Hell's Kitchen under the night, and walked in with a smile. The next day, early morning. The bright sunshine made a good start for the day, but Milan was holding a newspaper and burst into tears in the morning light. There was a violent explosion in Hell's Kitchen, but the miraculous thing was that it did not cause many casualties, but a man's body was hung on a building outside the explosion site. According to the investigation, the man who was hung up was named by a loan shark. Thank you, Milan murmured in a low voice, folded the newspaper and put it in his pocket, and walked towards the cemetery where Grace was. On the other side, Bobby found Wheeler in the math classroom with a newspaper. You did it, it must be you, Bobby asked excitedly, lowering his voice. What is it? Wheeler raised his eyelids. This, Bobby poked the newspaper with his finger. Wheeler took a look and said expressionlessly, no, hey, just admit it, how can it be such a coincidence? I warn you, you have to have evidence when you speak, I can sue you for defamation. Hearing this, Bobby was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly realized, oh, I understand, you know shit. Wheeler's mouth twitched, and he ignored Bobby and lowered his head to quickly pick up the documents in front of him. These are the people who applied to join X Factor. Bobby took a look and said in surprise, there are so many, this is just a part. Wheeler pointed to the file bag on the table expressionlessly, and said with a headache, I suspect that everyone in the school has submitted a profile. Most of the people here submitted the profiles with the intention of joining in the fun. Either their abilities are not suitable for fighting, or they are too young. Bobby chuckled, don't doubt the appeal of X Factor. Wheeler shook his head helplessly and said to Bobby, tell them that X Factor has no intention of expanding for the time being, but we will conduct an investigation secretly. If someone meets the requirements, we will send him an invitation. Bobby was stunned and said, what are the requirements? Wheeler glanced at Bobby, give me the specific requirements? How can we investigate if you tell me? I understand. Chapter 63 Trigger Reward. Time flies, and soon another month has passed. In this month, Wheeler dealt with several mutant incidents. Among these mutant incidents, there were incidents that asked him to catch malicious crimes with mutant abilities, and there were also incidents that asked him to help mutants who had just awakened their abilities. To sum it up simply, except for the occasional mission, the days were very peaceful, which made Wheeler, who was slacking off every day, very happy. What made Wheeler even happier was the growth of world points. World points. 12,635. World point growth rate. 230/day. World point source. 21. Because of the relationship he had established with Callison before, one more relationship point was added. Looking at these world points, Wheeler really had the urge to use them all. After all, this could ripen 4 silver fruits. Speaking of fruits, after a month, the world tree was refreshed again, adding 8 new fruits, 3 silver, 5 bronze. As a result, the number of fruits in the world reached 25, 1 gold, 9 silver, 15 bronze. After glancing at the statistics in the system, Wheeler quickly exited the system space. If he continued to read, he was afraid that he would not be able to help himself and use up the world points. Wheeler got up from the bed, washed up in the bathroom, and changed into comfortable sportswear. It was already late autumn, and the weather was getting colder. Today, Wheeler planned to go out of school and buy some things for himself. Before, he used all his money to buy Stark Industries stocks, including the salary Tony gave him when he was Tony's bodyguard. Although he could not compare with those billionaires, his current assets had already exceeded 7 figures. Some time ago, Stark Industries stocks rose rapidly, but they have slowly stabilized in the past few days. Walking on the campus, Wheeler greeted the children passing by. As time passed, although X Factor was still popular in the school and Wheeler was still the students' favorite star, because they were getting more and more familiar with each other, the enthusiasm for chasing stars gradually faded. Wheeler was relieved about this. Although it is Sunday today, unlike other schools, many students will stay in X school even if it is a holiday. Because those children have nowhere else to go except school. Therefore, these children have the strongest feelings for the school. Wheeler walked out of the school. When he was alone, he would fly directly. He liked the feeling of flying in the air more and more. Just when he walked to the school gate and was about to find an inconspicuous place to take off, his cell phone rang. Tony, Wheeler was a little surprised. They haven't contacted each other for a while since Tony invited him to become an Avenger last time. However, Wheeler often saw news about Iron Man fighting terrorists in the news. This guy is completely in conflict with the 10 Rings. After picking up the phone, Tony's proud voice sounded before Wheeler could speak. Hey, college student, guess where I am? Wheeler grinned, on the bed of a golden cat. Huh, where can I call you? Wheeler made a joke. It won't be above my head, right? Tony was silent. Wheeler's mouth twitched, and he looked up at the sky. You are not really above my head, are you? Tony said speechlessly, Damn it, how did you guess it? Wheeler laughed and changed the subject. Why do you remember school? Tony said nostalgically. Remember the question I asked you when I just made the Iron Man suit? I don't remember. Wheeler's answer was very straightforward. You don't remember it? Tony's voice rose 8 degrees. He rarely remembers something for so long, but now, the other party actually said he forgot? Tony was silent for a few seconds, gritted his teeth and said, "You scumbag, huh?" Wheeler's eyes twitched. At this moment, Wheeler suddenly felt that the event point disappeared by 50 points. The next second, a reflection fruit on the reflection of the world tree fell from the tree. Snap! The fruit shattered. A crisp sound rang in Wheeler's mind. Mission complete. Tony Stark's challenge. Reward, a ripe bronze fruit. Wheeler was stunned. He had always thought that the event point was to cause trouble for him, but now this event point actually has benefits? Wheeler grinned. Just wait, I'll beat you up right away. As he said that, Wheeler found a corner where no one was, and with the appearance of blue energy wings, his body jumped into the sky. Here it comes. Tony looked at the blue light that shot straight into the sky, and his eyes flashed with excitement. Jarvis, check the status of the body. Everything is normal. Very good, Tony responded and calmed himself down. In the past half-month, with his several battles with the 10 rings, he has become familiar with the new reactor in the Iron Man suit. I hope I can beat this guy, Tony murmured. Although the performance of the Iron Man suit is now far superior to the suit driven by the first generation of the arc reactor, Wheeler's ability is also constantly growing. Until now, the scene of Wheeler's battle still clearly appeared in his mind, especially the scene of holding up the energy bomb and blowing off several floors of his Stark building. Boom! A thumb-sized energy ball exploded in front of Tony. Tony came back to his senses, looked at Wheeler, raised his hand and greeted him. Wheeler raised his eyebrows, but was stunned when he saw the reactor on Tony's chest. The shape changed? If he remembered correctly, it was round before, but now it has become a triangle. The reactor on the chest has been updated? No wonder he came to challenge him. Wheeler smiled slightly and hooked his finger at Tony. Let's see how powerful this new Iron Man suit is. The next second, Tony responded to his provocation. In the flames, Tony flew towards him and raised his hand to blast out a bright pulse cannon. Wheeler raised his eyebrows, and a wing behind him waved to block the pulse cannon for him. During this period, although he was slacking off in class, he put a lot of effort into training his abilities. Seeing that Wheeler blocked the pulse cannon, Tony was not polite and turned around Wheeler at a very fast speed, while continuously firing pulse cannons at Wheeler. Wheeler's eyes flashed, and unlimited defense was instantly launched. Blue energy appeared under his feet with him as the center, just like a piece of blue land appeared in the air. This is the effect of unlimited defense without the cover of land. The next moment, facing the falling pulse cannons, unlimited defense changed, and energy shields emerged one after another, accurately blocking the incoming pulse cannons. What's the new trick? Tony looked at this scene in surprise, and then laughed. Then I'll give you a big one. As soon as he finished speaking, a small missile shot from his arm towards Wheeler. Wheeler's eyes jumped. An unlimited defense disappeared instantly. He raised his hand and swung out several energy cards, colliding with the missile. Boom! In the fierce explosion, flames and shock waves surged in the air. Wheeler raised his wings to block the shock wave and couldn't help laughing. Tony knew his ability, so he didn't fight him in close combat. Where did you go? Wheeler was stunned, but heard a harsh whistle from above his head. Chapter 64. Want to be a hero? Wheeler looked up and his mouth twitched. Good fellow. Tony is really rude. Dozens of micro-missiles whizzed and fell towards him like a rainstorm with scorching flames. Wheeler smiled slightly, and the wings behind him suddenly detached from behind him. As Wheeler fell, the blue light wings suddenly shattered and turned into blue light rain to meet him. Boom, boom. Accompanied by fierce explosions, flames and blue energy bloomed in the air like fireworks, as if occupying the entire sky. Two figures fell rapidly from the air and landed in the forest not far from X School. Click. Tony opened his mask and showed a smug smile. Wheeler walked in front of Tony, hammered Tony's battle suit hard, and said unhappily, "You are really rude, and you are not afraid of blowing me to death?" Tony smiled slightly, and with the sound of the battle suit's click, he walked out of the open battle suit. "Don't worry, if you are really blown to death, I will definitely find the best place to bury you, and find a bunch of beautiful girls to sing Requiem for you. You are just as bad as the shrews in politics," Wheeler complained and asked curiously, "Why did you think of school?" I was just passing by, Tony shrugged and explained. Didn't I tell you before that I plan to move Stark Tower to New York? That's right, Wheeler nodded. Tony gestured with his hand, where I plan to build a new arc reactor to supply energy for the entire building, so I have to check the location and make a new design. He pointed to the new reactor on his chest and said, the second-generation reactor has stronger energy and longer-lasting power. Wheeler's eyes flashed with a hint of pity, and he asked, how long will it take to build it? The plan is 1 year. Wheeler nodded, but sighed in his heart. I don't know if this building can survive longer. Oh, right. Wheeler seemed to remember something and asked curiously, how are you dealing with the Ten Rings gang? I see you've been quite active recently. Tony frowned and said worriedly, although we've dealt with a lot of them, it's harder than I thought to clean them up completely. There are a lot of people in the Ten Rings gang. They are not only spread across the Middle East, but are also engaged in criminal activities in other countries. Be careful, Wheeler nodded and said casually. Tony seemed a little unconcerned. Don't worry, they are not on the same level as me now. Then he changed the subject. I heard that recently, many people in the military and government have been thrown into prison. It seems to be related to School X. Well, it was caused by a colonel named Stryker. Stryker, let's go. Find another place to talk. The story is a bit long. Okay, Tony responded, put on the iron suit and challenged Wheeler. Can you keep up? Wheeler raised his eyebrows. Just fly. If you can't keep up, I lose. Tony put on his mask, and when his palm was about to fly with flames, a blue energy rope was entangled in his armor. Tony's face darkened, looking at the smiling Wheeler, muttered, are college students nowadays so treacherous? After the words fell, he soared into the sky. Russia, Moscow. Although it is only late autumn, Moscow has already started snowing, and it has become a cold world covered with ice and snow. The shabby wooden door that could not even stop the cold wind was knocked. Ivan Vanko, who had long hair, put down the tools in his hand, covered the things on the workbench slightly, picked up the coat beside him and put it on, walked out of the simple studio and opened the door. The person knocking on the door was wearing a black coat and a mink hat. He was a rich man. Ivan Vanko took a look and was about to close the door with an expressionless face. He didn't know any rich people. Pop, the man outside the door stretched out his hand and pressed on the door, slightly pushing it open. He smiled at Ivan Vanko and said, I'm looking for Ivan Vanko. Ivan Vanko said coldly, he's dead. Dead. The man named Savin was stunned for a moment, then frowned and said, who are you? Ivan Vanko said expressionlessly, his son. It seems that I didn't find the wrong person. Savin smiled and said, I'm here to help you. Help me? Ha. Ivan Vanko sneered and bit the toothpick in his mouth. That's right, help you deal with Tony Stark. Ivan Vanko was stunned for a moment, then frowned and said, come in. Savin nodded, a wise choice, buddy. Savin walked into the house and looked at Ivan Vanko's shabby home. Dim lights, worn-out furniture, a bed that smelled sour, and a stench coming from the bathroom. Savin chuckled, dude, it looks like you're having a hard time. If you're here to talk nonsense, get out of here. Ivan Vanko impatiently spat out the toothpick in his mouth, with a dangerous look in his eyes. Savin sneered, before discussing things with you, I think it's necessary to let you know our strength. He pressed his hand on the iron table in front of him, and his hand turned red, emitting extremely high temperature. In just a few seconds, the place where the iron table touched his palm turned red, and then turned into molten iron and fell to the ground. Ivan Vanko's eyes narrowed. Are you a mutant? No, I'm not one of those monsters. Savin smiled contemptuously and said, can we talk now? Ivan Vanko pondered, you just said to deal with Tony Stark? What's the problem between you and him? Savin looked around and saw that there was no place to sit down. He gave up the idea of sitting down and talking about things and said unhappily, he has been causing trouble for us recently. Ivan Vanko recalled the information he had recently collected about Tony Stark and guessed, are you from the Ten Rings, Papa? Savin clapped his hands with appreciation. You are really smart people. We like to cooperate with smart people, Ivan Vanko said with interest. Cooperation? How do you want to cooperate? If the other party is the Ten Rings, it is indeed possible to cooperate. After all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Savin's face straightened and said, before cooperation, I want to ask a question. Ivan Vanko narrowed his eyes and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Is this to check whether he is qualified to cooperate? Tell me, did your father leave you any inheritance? For example, the design drawings of the arc reactor, or something better? Ivan Vanko did not answer, but walked into the inner studio. A moment later, Ivan Vanko came out with a glowing object, tossed it twice, and sneered at Savin. "You mean, this thing, micro-reactor?" Savin's eyes narrowed, greed flashed in his eyes, and he said, "Did you make this?" Ivan Vanko sneered. "What else? Is it the useless old man in my family who was hid and now rotten?" "Very good." Savin nodded in surprise. "I want to know if you can do that," Ivan Vanko said lightly. "As long as there is enough money, I can make an iron suit." Hearing this, Savin was delighted. A bright smile bloomed on his face, and said, "In this case, we will cooperate with you with the greatest sincerity." After a pause, Savin remembered what his boss had told him before Russia, and stretched out his hand to Ivan Vanko, smiling. "So, Mr. Vanko, do you want to be a hero?" Savin is a character who appeared in Iron Man 3. Killian's subordinate, the short-haired man who held the President of the United States hostage in a war machine. Chapter 65 Speech. As night fell, a blue shooting star fell on X school. Several startled students greeted Wheeler with a smile after seeing the true face of the shooting star. "Hey, Wheeler. So cool. When will you approve my application, dude? Help me develop my abilities when you have time," Wheeler responded to several people while rushing into the dormitory quickly. After closing the door, Wheeler sat on the bed and couldn't wait to enter the system space. After fighting with Tony this morning, he completed the event point task. He really didn't expect that the event point could trigger a task with a reward. He always thought that this thing was just to cause trouble for him. Where is the task reward? A question emerged in Wheeler's mind. But the next second, a bronze fruit appeared from the reflection of the world tree and floated in front of Wheeler. It actually appeared from below. Wheeler was stunned and grabbed the fruit. Can this fruit be used as an upgrade material for other fruits? Wheeler just had a question in his mind and got the answer. No. There is nothing to say then. Wheeler opened his eyes, and a bronze fruit appeared in his palm. He squeezed it hard, and the fruit broke. The bronze light scattered, and a ball of light appeared in his hand. Martial Arts Master's Close Combat Experience, 3 years, what the hell? Wheeler was stunned. Another experience package? He had also received an experience package for 5 years of combat experience before, but it was not as detailed as this time. It's better than nothing. After all, it's an unexpected gain, Wheeler muttered, and the ball of light disappeared in his hand, and a large amount of close combat experience appeared in his mind. It actually includes experience in using various close combat weapons. Wheeler was a little surprised. In this case, it greatly enriched his fighting style. This experience package is more useful than expected. Wheeler murmured, put his hands behind his head and fell on the bed. Today, Tony talked to him about a lot of things. For example, Tony's hatred of the 10 rings. For example, Tony plans to hold a new Stark Expo and has already started preparations. For example, he wants to build the Stark Building Interlandmark building in New York, and so on. Thinking of Tony's proud look when he talked about his future plans, Wheeler couldn't help but sigh. That guy has become more and more arrogant since he became Iron Man, as if the whole world revolves around him. I hope he doesn't suffer any blows, otherwise with his current mentality, I'm afraid he will be uncomfortable for a while, Wheeler whispered, thinking about the close combat experience he just gained, and began to plan a new fighting style. Ding, ding. Wheeler was awakened by the sound of the phone. Professor? Wheeler was stunned for a moment and answered the phone. Professor? What's the matter? Wheeler was a little confused. Wheeler, do you have time tomorrow? Professor X asked politely. Wheeler chuckled, if you give me a holiday, I will have time. Professor X pondered and said, sorry, I forgot you are a student who is about to graduate. There is no need to point this out specifically. Wheeler's eyes twitched. Perhaps thinking of Wheeler's current expression, X chuckled and said, come with me to Washington tomorrow. Washington? No problem, Wheeler agreed, and then said, where to go? I'll prepare, Professor X whispered, going to the Capitol. No need to prepare anything, just listen to Jean's speech. The Capitol? Wheeler raised his eyebrows and said, I know, wish you a good dream. After that, Professor X hung up the phone. What to do in the Capitol? Wheeler thought more about it and fell into deep sleep. The next day, it was sunny. Wheeler got up early, changed into a casual outfit he had just bought, and went to Professor X's office. After knocking on the door, Wheeler walked in. At this time, Professor X was sitting at his desk, sorting out materials and drinking strong coffee. Professor, when are we leaving? Wheeler asked, and after noticing Professor X's faint dark circles, he raised his eyebrows slightly. Professor X put down the cup, closed his eyes and gently rubbed his swollen forehead, saying, "Wait for Jean to come and we'll set off." Because of what happened today, he didn't sleep well the whole night. Professor X opened his eyes and saw Wheeler's face full of curiosity, and smiled slightly. "Jean is going to give a speech to Congress, and you and I will be the audience." "What speech?" Wheeler was a little interested. Professor X put the information into the file bag and said, "A speech to dispel the idea of those congressmen passing the mutant registration bill." Mutant registration bill? Wheeler frowned. "It doesn't sound like a good thing." "You are right, so there's this speech?" Professor X drove the wheelchair out from behind the desk and handed the file bag to Wheeler. Wheeler took the file bag. "I don't think that just one speech can make them give up that idea." Professor X's eyes sank, and then smiled. "But we have to try." At this time, Jean pushed open the door of the office and walked in. "Professor, let's go." She nodded to Wheeler and said hello. "Yeah," the professor responded and drove the wheelchair to take the two out of the office. A few minutes later, the three of them took Professor X's small private plane and left the X school. As soon as the three got off the plane, they went straight to Capitol Hill and walked into the Capitol with serious faces. It was the first time for Wheeler to come here, and he couldn't help but look around curiously. Noticing Wheeler's expression, Ken whispered, "This place was built in 1793. It symbolizes the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is called the heart of the United States." Wheeler looked at Ken with amusement. "Teacher Ken, now is not the time to teach me history." Ken was stunned for a moment and smiled. "Sorry, I'm used to it. At school, she often takes students to visit various buildings." Professor X smiled and said, "Ken, I'll leave it to you later." Ken is the kind of person who looks gentle but is actually firm in her heart. Coupled with her professional knowledge of biology, she is the best candidate for this speech. Ken nodded, but quietly took out a pair of black framed metal glasses and put them on her face. "How about it? Does it look more serious this way?" Ken asked Wheeler in a low voice. Gently pushed the frame. She always felt that her expression was too gentle and not suitable for this kind of occasion. A red professional suit, a red short skirt, and a pair of black framed glasses. Wheeler was stunned for a moment, pinching his chin and said, "I'm afraid everyone is staring at you and can't take their eyes off you." Professor X nodded in agreement. Jean blushed, took the file bag from Wheeler's hand, and said to Wheeler, "Take good care of the professor." Wheeler nodded, and he and Professor X watched the slender figure walk into the podium surrounded by a group of congressmen. "Let's go to the second floor," Professor X said, turning back to explain to Wheeler, "It's clearer there." Chapter 66 Soil. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing another stage of human evolution. Mutations often occur during adolescence, triggered by emotional fluctuations. Ken spoke slowly in the hall with her unique gentle voice, explaining to everyone what mutations are, trying to dispel the fears born out of ignorance. But before she finished, she was interrupted. "Thank you, Miss Gray. Your words are quite educational, but they deviate from the theme of this meeting." A blonde congressman wearing glasses interrupted Jean loudly, and then asked in a harsh tone, "Don't forget, we are here to discuss the dangers of mutants." Jean said calmly, "Your question is not accurate. Mutants and dangers are not simple." Jean still hadn't finished her words, and the congressman interrupted her loudly and sneered, "Inaccurate? As far as I know, some mutants can pass through walls. If she sneaks into a bank or into the homes of everyone present, who can guarantee the safety of your lives and property? Some mutants can control people's minds. Who can guarantee that he will not manipulate us like puppets, play with our minds, and deprive us of our free will?" After a pause, the congressman walked to the center surrounded by the conference table, looked around at the congressman, and said loudly, "Therefore, we have the right to decide whether to have mutants as classmates, neighbors, or keep a safe distance from them. This is exactly why the Mutant Registration Act is being implemented." After the words fell, the whole venue burst into applause. Congressman Kelly looked at this scene with a flash of enjoyment in his eyes. Listening to the applause from below, Wheeler's expression was calm. What results can be achieved by discussing the issue of mutants in a parliament composed entirely of humans? Moreover, many politicians have already regarded the handling of the mutant issue as their political achievements for getting to power, so how could they easily give up the Mutant Registration Act? These politicians are nothing more than greedy people who, under the banner of caring for the people, create acute problems, and then achieve political achievements to help themselves rise to high positions. A series of thoughts flashed through Wheeler's mind. He already had an answer to the outcome of this meeting, but he still felt that the applause at this moment was so harsh. At this time, the applause gradually faded. Ken immediately said, "But in fact, if mutants show up in public, it will cause panic, hostility, and even violence. So in order to avoid this kind of hostility, I implore the cancellation of the mutant registration bill that forces them to reveal their identities," Congressman Kelly asked in a heavy tone. "Then who will protect our rights? Mutants exist among us, and maybe around everyone here. So we have to know who they are, what abilities they have, and then thoroughly study them to protect our rights. This is the meaning of the existence of the Mutant Registration Act." Applause rang out again, and Wheeler sighed. There was no need to read on. He glanced at Professor X and found that Professor X's eyes dimmed, and then returned to their original spirit. Professor X patted the wheelchair, motioned Wheeler to push him away, and smiled. "Do you think I will be hit by this?" Wheeler shook his head, pushed Professor X away from the crowd, and walked out of the Capitol. If Professor X was hit by this, he would not be Professor X. Wheeler couldn't help asking, "Professor, you've been through so much? Do you still have hope for humanity?" Professor X nodded without any hesitation and said, "Yes, Wheeler, you should always have hope. I've seen a lot of things. I understand the evil of human hearts better than anyone else, and I also understand the nobility of human hearts better than anyone else." He sighed and said with a distant look, "Mutants are the next step in human evolution. In the future, every human may become a mutant. Now is a very important turning point. As long as there are more and more mutants, people will understand that this is an inevitable result. When they understand mutants more and more and are no longer afraid of them, the harmonious coexistence of the two races will no longer be just a luxury. Humans are the soil for mutants to grow." It was the first time that the professor said this to him, as if he had brought him here specifically for class. Wheeler looked thoughtful, and suddenly remembered a plot, so he said in a deep voice, "Professor, if someone wants to forcibly interrupt this process and wants to turn mutants back into humans." Professor X smiled and said, "Wheeler, I am a mutant, and I have always been a mutant." The two walked out of the Capitol unknowingly. Suddenly, a mocking laugh sounded behind the two of them. "Charles, you are still so naive." Wheeler pushed Professor X and turned around. The old man with a gentleman's hat was looking at them. Professor X said with a serious face, "Eric." Magneto looked at Wheeler and nodded to him. "See you again, Wheeler." After a pause, he smiled and said, "Stryker did a good job some time ago." During this period, the X-Men were active frequently, destroying several secret bases and rescuing many mutants. It was not surprising that Magneto knew about Stryker. Magneto sneered, but it was not cleaned up enough. "Eric," seeing that Magneto ignored him, Professor X said angrily, "What are you doing here?" Magneto still ignored Professor X, but looked at Wheeler and smiled. "Do you really think Charles's approach is correct, holding the naive idea of harmonious coexistence, putting hope on the so-called soil, on the inferior race of human beings? Do you think it is right?" Wheeler's mouth twitched. Why did Magneto call him by name again? Wouldn't it be better to let him be a quiet audience? But after a pause, Wheeler still answered, "I have never put down my weapon, so what if I just watch it?" Magneto was stunned for a moment, then laughed softly. "What a cunning answer." Professor X stared at Magneto and said coldly, "What are you doing here?" Magneto smiled slightly. "You were not so cold to me last time." Suddenly, his face turned cold. "Get out of my head, Charles." Professor X held the armrest of the wheelchair hard and said in a deep voice, "What do you want to do?" He sensed a strong malice. "Didn't you say that humans are the soil of mutants?" Magneto smiled slightly. "Since it is soil, it must be harvested, isn't it?" After speaking, Magneto pressed the brim of his hat, nodded politely to the two, and left quickly. Wheeler asked curiously, "Professor, what did you see?" Professor X shook his head solemnly and said, "Based on what I know about him, something terrible will happen." Silence. After a few minutes, Jean walked out of the Parliament Hall with a frustrated look on her face and said to Professor X, "Sorry, Professor, I didn't stop them." Professor X smiled. "Jean, you've done a good job." Wheeler couldn't help but ask, "Will the Mutant Registration Act be introduced?" "If this bill is really introduced, he will definitely not register." "No," Jean shook her head and said, "those congressmen think that the registration bill and the issue of mutants should be discussed at the United Nations Summit in 3 days. Once successful, the registration bill will be recognized by the whole world." United Nations Summit? Wheeler was stunned for a moment, thinking of Magneto just now, and finally remembered something. Chapter 67. A genius idea, but not necessary. Tonight, the United Nations Summit will open at Ellis Island, and the heads of state of various countries will attend. The number of participating countries is unprecedented. Leaders of more than 200 countries will discuss the economy, arms agreements, and the increasingly serious mutant problem in recent years and their impact on the world. Many American congressmen believe that the primary topic of this meeting is to reach a consensus on mutant management and introduce a mutant registration bill. Ellis Island used to be. Click. Ororo turned off the TV and threw the remote control aside. Professor, do you really think Magneto will do anything at such an important meeting? Professor X nodded without hesitation. It is precisely because it is important and because the eyes of the whole world are on that meeting that he will choose to do something there. Wheeler smiled and said, he is a man of the scene. Professor X was stunned for a moment, but laughed softly. In some ways, Wheeler is right. Summit. Magneto. Wheeler thought of the instrument that appeared in the plot that can turn ordinary people into mutants. But what about the little rascal? He remembered that in the original plot, because the instrument consumed too much energy, Magneto found Rogue who could absorb other people's abilities to replace him. But now Rogue is not in school. Wait? He remembered that in the original plot, Rogue met Logan. But now Logan has been in X school for a long time, and the plot has long been in a different direction. Maybe Rogue has been captured by Magneto. A thought came to Wheeler's mind. At this moment, Jean walked in with a serious face and said, Professor, what's wrong? Professor X noticed a trace of panic in Jean's eyes, and her expression became serious. Jean hurriedly said, someone came to seek help. You need to come and see. Professor X nodded, and said to Ororo and Wheeler on the side, you should come too. A moment later, several people appeared in the school's medical room. Is that Senator Kelly? Noticing the person on the medical bed, Wheeler raised his eyebrows and finally remembered this unlucky guy. It seems that in the original plot, this senator was taken away by Magneto for mutant transformation experiments. Although the congressman had mutant abilities, he died due to genetic collapse. Jean nodded and said to everyone, yes, he mutated, but it was not natural. Hearing Jean's words, Congressman Kelly said in a cold tone, so, you brought so many people here to laugh at me. Jean was not angry, but said gently, no, it's to help you. Congressman Kelly sneered, you mutants are weird. Wheeler said coldly, shut your stinky mouth. If you keep talking nonsense, I will throw you out. Congressman Kelly clenched his fists, but closed his mouth unwillingly. Professor X drove the wheelchair to Congressman Kelly. What happened? Congressman Kelly looked painful, with deep resentment, and said, you should ask Magneto about this. Professor X stretched out his hands and gently pressed on Congressman Kelly's forehead. Relax, let me see what happened. The power of the mind slowly entered Congressman Kelly's head. While comforting him, Professor X saw what happened the day before yesterday. When the congressional meeting ended and Senator Kelly left, he was abducted by Mystique, who was disguised as a bodyguard, to Magneto's base. That is, an uninhabited island located in the vast ocean. On the same day, Magneto used a strange instrument to irradiate Senator Kelly, causing him to mutate. A day later, Senator Kelly awakened the ability to transform into a jellyfish, escaped from Magneto's base through the ability to transform, fell into the sea and swam back. Professor X put away his ability, recalled the memory he had just browsed, and looked thoughtful. The instrument that can make people mutate? Magneto looked very weak after using the instrument. Magneto has developed something incredible. Professor X's face turned very ugly. He had guessed Magneto's plan. What could make Magneto happier than turning the representatives or heads of state of various countries at the summit into mutants? With his understanding of Magneto will definitely take action at the summit. He was almost certain of this. But the question is, where will they put the instrument? Thinking in his mind, Professor X said to Jean, continue to observe Senator Kelly. We have something to discuss. Jean nodded. I understand. Professor X took Wheeler and Ororo away, and on the way to the office, he used telepathy to call the X-Men and X-Factor to the office. When everyone arrived, Professor X told everyone what he had just seen and his guess. As soon as he finished speaking, Murat said in surprise, this idea is too genius. Murat. Ororo glared at Murat. Murat curled his lips and said, isn't this good? Those people becoming mutants should be good for mutants. Hearing this, Logan nodded in agreement. At this time, Jean pushed open the door of the office and walked in, saying palely, Senator Kelly is dead, died of genetic collapse. Everyone's eyes fell on Jean, and Murat smiled awkwardly and said, the idea is genius, but it is completely unnecessary. Puff. Katie couldn't help laughing out loud. Logan said calmly, so, just find that Magneto and stop him. He looked at Professor X. This is what the professor is best at. Professor X looked at everyone. You go and prepare. I'll go find Magneto, and then stop them right away. Jean said, Professor, I'll go with you. Wheeler stood up from the sofa and smiled. I'll go with you too. He didn't say anything. He was recalling the plot that he had seen a long time ago but had already vaguely remembered. A moment later, the three of them came to the brainwave room. When Professor X was about to put on the helmet of the brainwave machine, Wheeler's eyes flashed and he said, Professor, if I were Magneto, I would definitely be on guard against the X-Men to prevent you from using your ability to find them. Professor X paused and nodded. You are right. Eric knows my ability very well. He knows that I can use the brainwave machine to find them. If he is not prepared for this, it is not like his character. He was anxious in his heart and forgot this point. Jean was startled and asked, Professor, what do you mean? Professor X looked at the brainwave machine in front of him and said in a deep voice, Jen, check the brainwave machine. Maybe Eric has tampered with it. I know. Jean responded and quickly checked the brainwave machine. After a while, Jean finally found something unusual. She held a palm-sized metal can and said to Wheeler and the others with a look of relief, I found it. This thing is inserted into the liquid conduction device connected to the nerves. As long as the professor starts the brainwave machine, the things inside will cause harm to the user. I think it is a neurotoxin. Wheeler. Thank you. Professor X nodded to Wheeler and said to Jean, Jen, clean it up. Time is running out. Was it Raven who was able to sneak into the brainwave room? Realizing this, Professor X's eyes flashed with sadness. Jean nodded and immediately got busy. Chapter 68 Traces. Wheeler and Jean stood outside the EEG room and waited quietly. Until now, Jean still felt a lingering fear when she thought about what she had just found in the EEG machine. She couldn't imagine the consequences of the professor being poisoned by the neurotoxin. Wheeler, Jean looked at Wheeler gratefully. What? Wheeler came back to his senses from trying to recall. Jean said very sincerely, thank you. Wheeler shrugged, now I am also a part of the school. Relationship points plus 20. Jean showed a charming smile. Squeak. With a slight sound, the door of the EEG room opened, and Professor X appeared in front of the two in a wheelchair. Jean said nervously, Professor, how is it? Have you found Magneto? Professor X shook his head. He should be wearing a helmet that can block telepathy. Just as Jean and Wheeler looked at Professor X in disbelief, Professor X smiled and said, but I found the traces of Mystique and other subordinates of Magneto. Mystique is Magneto's right-hand man. Finding Mystique often means finding Magneto. Great. A look of surprise flashed across Jean's face. Let's go now. A moment later, the Blackbird fighter took off from the school and flew towards Ellis Island. Because of the last time Stryker sent shadows to attack the school, Professor X and Jean stayed in the school. After all, Stryker's notebook mentioned that there were other numbered experimental projects, and Wheeler and the others didn't know whether the people in charge of these projects would also regard X school as a target. Only if Professor X stayed in the school would everyone be most assured. Besides, the X-Men and X-Factor were already powerful enough. On the fighter plane, Wheeler felt a faint sense of uneasiness. He couldn't help but think of Magneto's confident expression and what he said to Professor X. Humans are the soil of mutants, and since it is soil, there must be something to gain. Wheeler always felt that this time was too smooth. A thought flashed through his mind. Since the plot has already changed, will Magneto make the same arrangement as the original plot? Wheeler thought and took out his mobile phone, and called Tony amid everyone's puzzled expressions. Dude. Why are you calling me at this time? My nighttime doesn't belong to you, Tony. I need you to help me check someone. Seeing Wheeler's serious tone, Tony also put away his joking tone. Who? Magneto. Please help me check and see if you can find any trace of Magneto around the venue of the United Nations Summit. United Nations Summit, Tony exclaimed, and said, what does he want to do? Wheeler said helplessly, I'll explain to you later. Please help me check it now. Okay, I'll let Jarvis check it as quickly as possible. Wait for my news. After that, Wheeler hung up the phone. Seeing everyone looking at him in confusion, Wheeler smiled and said, there's no harm in checking. I always feel a little uneasy without finding any trace of Magneto. Logan smiled and shook his head. "You've always been like this, always doing things cautiously," Wheeler said lightly. "This is a good habit, isn't it?" Katie winked at the other two members of X Factor, and the three immediately agreed. "That's right. That's right. Good habit." Seeing this scene, the X-Men laughed out loud. Murat laughed. "Haha. X Factor's people are flatterers." Weller covered his eyes as he looked at the three people, looking like he couldn't bear to watch, but the corners of his mouth slightly raised. "You three should be normal." Bobby and Peter blushed, but Katie raised her chin and said to Weller firmly, "I'm telling the truth." "Oh, Katie. Enough. I can't stand it anymore." Ororo, who was driving the fighter plane, turned around and said, with disgust on her face, "It's disgusting. Is this X Factor? The atmosphere in the school is bad." Logan and others complained, and the tense atmosphere before the war was relieved a lot. The Blackbird fighter plane flew across the night sky, flew over Manhattan and came to Liberty Island, looking for a place to land. Liberty Island is less than 500 meters away from Ellis Island, and Professor X was at the location of the Statue of Liberty and sensed Mystique and her group. "Start the mutation machine on the Statue of Liberty, so that the heads of state or representatives on Ellis Island will be illuminated by mutation radiation and gain true freedom." This is what Magneto thought. He is indeed a man of the scene. Wheeler sighed in his heart again. Ororo's eyes turned completely wide, and he used his ability to summon thick fog. The Blackbird fighter turned on the camouflage and concealed its fuselage in the fog. Like a night owl looking for prey in the dark, it landed silently behind Liberty Island and landed in the sea not far from the coast. The hatch opened, and Bobby walked out first, using his ability to create an ice road and led everyone to the coast. Ororo activated the fighter's camouflage and made the fighter disappear on the sea. Scott pressed the communicator and whispered to everyone, "Be careful, because of the United Nations summit tonight." Not only Ellis Island was heavily guarded, but also many police and soldiers were on guard on Liberty Island, which was closest to it. Everyone nodded in the dark and moved towards the Statue of Liberty. At this moment, Wheeler's phone vibrated. Wheeler took out his phone, signaled everyone not to wait for him, and went to the Statue of Liberty first, and then found a safe corner to answer the call. "Tony, is there any result?" Wheeler asked in a low voice. "No trace of Magneto was found." "No," Wheeler frowned. "But," Tony said with a little smug smile, "I found that some surveillance cameras in the Immigration Museum on Ellis Island were tampered with 3 days ago. This should be enough to explain something. Countless immigrants were inspected at Ellis Island and took the first step towards the American dream. Now, after the immigration inspection station on Ellis Island has lost its function, it has become an immigration museum. The distance between the Immigration Museum and the summit venue is less than 200 meters, which is closer than the distance between Liberty Island and Ellis Island." "Thank you," Wheeler said and hung up the phone. Wheeler pressed the communicator and told everyone his guess. After asking everyone to deal with the enemy in the Statue of Liberty, he flew to Ellis Island. At Wheeler's current speed, hundreds of meters of distance passed in a flash. At this time, the lights of Ellis Island were bright, like stars falling in the middle of the sea. Wheeler flew close to the sea surface towards Ellis Island. The moment the light wings behind him disappeared, he landed on the island silently. The moment his feet touched the ground, Wheeler instantly entered the super body state, like a shadow passing by quickly, flexibly avoiding the guards on the island and rushing to the Immigration Museum. At the same time, the sound of fighting came from the communicator. Have Logan and the others fought with the enemy? Wheeler's eyes condensed and he sped up. At this time, all eyes were focused on the United Nations summit venue on the island, and the Immigration Museum seemed unusually quiet. Wheeler moved quickly in the Immigration Museum, looking for Magneto's traces. But there was none. Was he wrong? "No, there is still a place that has not been searched," Wheeler whispered and came to the open space in the middle of the museum yard. Then, the light wings behind Wheeler flapped and sent him to the roof of the museum. "Found it, thank you Ranchin for the 100 starting coins reward." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. Once again. Looking at Wheeler who suddenly appeared, Magneto's face flashed with surprise, but then he chuckled. Wheeler was very good, but it was too late to stop him. The mutant instrument had begun to rotate. As it continued to absorb Magneto's power, a trace of pain appeared on his face, and a strong white light appeared on the mutant instrument that seemed to be composed of several rings. Seeing this scene, Wheeler's eyes shrank, and he entered the super body state without hesitation and rushed towards Magneto. But just as Wheeler made a move, a figure who had been ambushing in the shadows suddenly pounced on Wheeler, and his sharp claws grabbed the vital parts of Wheeler's body without hesitation. Bang! The blue energy spot scattered, and Wheeler was knocked out. Looking at the battle suit with a hole in it, Wheeler glanced at the enemy as he flew out. Fierce eyes, strong body, and curved nails like cats. Logan's half-brother, saber-toothed tiger Victor? As the enemy information appeared in his mind, a strong blue energy bloomed in Wheeler's eyes. He instantly entered the full power state of the superbody. At the same time, a pair of blue light wings appeared behind him. The moment he stabilized his body, Wheeler flew around the saber-toothed tiger and flew towards Magneto. Ha! The saber-toothed tiger sneered, and at the moment Wheeler moved, it was like a big cat lying on the ground, with muscles bursting out, leaving several scratches on the roof, flying across a distance of several meters, blocking Magneto. The sharp claws swept towards Wheeler. Wheeler's arm was covered with blue energy and collided with the claws of the saber-toothed tiger. Bang! With a loud bang, the blue energy flew away, and the arm guard formed by the alien energy actually had several scratches. The saber-toothed tiger grabbed Wheeler's arm tightly and gave Wheeler a provocative smile. I heard that my stupid brother joined the X-Men gang. Wheeler didn't say anything, just looked at the increasingly strong and expanding white light. His expression became more and more solemn. This mutant device is on Ellis Island, too close to the UN summit. It only takes a little time to cover the entire sesame-sized island. By then, no ordinary person here can escape. Ignoring the saber-toothed tiger, Wheeler's eyes flashed, and the light wings behind him burst instantly, turning into balls of blue energy and flying towards Magneto. Damn it, Sabertooth cursed and tried to shake Wheeler off. But Wheeler's eyes flashed, and the blue energy arm guard protecting his arm turned into two sharp blades that pierced the palm of the saber-toothed tiger. Ah! Sabertooth screamed in pain and was kicked away by Wheeler. Boom, boom. A fierce explosion sounded, but Wheeler's eyes shrank. Pieces of metal that had been prepared long ago appeared under Magneto's feet, blocking Magneto like a wall, blocking Wheeler's attack for him. The steel was deformed and twisted in the explosion, but Magneto was not affected at all. While being sucked of power, Magneto was still able to manipulate metal with his ability. He was much more powerful than expected, or perhaps it was because the mutant machine had just started. The rich white light began to expand and spread, like an inflated and growing white jellyfish. It only took a few seconds for the people on the island to be mutated by radiation. At this time, the people in the summit venue also noticed the expanding white light, and slowly became panicked in doubt. Magneto's face was twisted in pain, and the metal floating in front of him lost control and fell down. Wheeler rushed towards Magneto without any hesitation. Time waits for no one. But the angry saber-toothed tiger once again blocked Magneto and gave Wheeler a provocative smile. Wheeler's eyes flashed with blue light, and he collided fiercely with the saber-toothed tiger. I blocked you, they are finished. The saber-toothed tiger was knocked away, but grinned. After leaving several scars on the roof with its claws, it still stood firmly in front of Magneto. Wheeler said softly, "That's enough." Only a few meters away, it was already within the range of unlimited defense. The next second, when the blue energy bloomed under his feet, energy cards flew towards Magneto in straight lines or curves. Sabertooth used his body without hesitation to block some of the energy cards, while the remaining energy cards were blocked by the slowly shaking metal. Is there really any energy left? Wheeler's eyes flashed, and Magneto smiled at the white light radiation that was about to reach the sky above the venue. But the next second, the smile on his face froze. I saw blue energy appearing from under the mutant machine like thorns growing wildly, madly entwining around the rotating ring of the mutant instrument, exuding a dangerous atmosphere. Then boom. The fierce explosion blew the mutant machine away, and the continuously spreading radiation also stopped and slowly dissipated. There was an uproar in the summit venue. Although the representatives of various countries in the venue didn't know what it was definitely not a performance used by the M side to welcome them, and often such things that were out of control represented danger. For a moment, the venue was in chaos, and the US side was angry and ordered the soldiers stationed on the island to surround the immigration museum. Helicopters, snipers, and the fleet circling Liberty Island all surrounded this side. But at this time, the museum was silent, as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, another white light appeared in the distance and spread towards this side at a very fast speed. It was the Statue of Liberty. Representatives from various countries were shocked. Twice in one night? Is this US government a shit-eater? How to do security? The US government was shocked and angry, feeling like its face fell to the ground and was stepped on hard. Fuck. Fuck, what's going on? What are those? Who are there? Go check. Kill those enemies, the person in charge of the venue security shouted angrily, sweating anxiously, but his body was shaking slightly in fear. This is a summit attended by more than 200 countries. If something goes wrong here, he is afraid that he will be crushed into ashes. The US government will also become a complete joke. At this moment, the white light that was spreading and almost falling on Ellis Island stopped like the white light just now, and then slowly dissipated. Seeing this scene, the security chief breathed a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know what was going on, the danger seemed to be temporarily lifted. Then he held the communicator and roared, "What's going on Liberty Island? Check it for me. If you find the enemy, kill them directly." In just a moment, the sea area seemed to boil, and the two islands began a carpet search. But the initiator of all this had already disappeared in the Immigration Museum. Left Ellis Island. Chapter 70 We Will Die. Wheeler stood opposite Liberty Island, enjoying the peace after the battle. At his feet lay two people. Sabretooth, who was knocked unconscious by the explosion, and Magneto, who was exhausted. When the mutant machine was blown up, Wheeler used an energy shield to protect Magneto, and Sabretooth took the opportunity to save Magneto, and then was covered in wounds and fell unconscious. A minute ago, when Wheeler and the two left Ellis Island and appeared on the opposite coast, the white light emitted from the Statue of Liberty startled Wheeler and made Magneto feel hopeful again. But the white light eventually dissipated, which made Wheeler feel relieved. Magneto was pale at this time, and Wheeler even felt a hint of old age and decadence from him. Magneto took a deep breath and said weakly, Why? Wheeler raised his eyebrows, looked at the old man who had dedicated his life to mutants, and sighed in his heart. He did not comment on whether what Magneto did was good or bad, but from the perspective of a mutant, Wheeler had some admiration for him. Magneto sat on the ground weakly and said calmly, Why stop me? For this attack, he was clearly prepared to risk his life. Wheeler said lightly, Kelly is dead. His body rejected the mutated genes and turned into a stream of water and disappeared on the medical bed. Magneto was stunned for a moment and frowned. It failed? What went wrong? After a pause, he took off the helmet that could resist telepathy and asked curiously, Why save me? Wheeler shrugged, Although our positions are different, you are for mutants after all. The mutants in this world need you. Magneto was a little surprised, and a smile appeared on his face. In other words, if Kelly didn't die and was successfully transformed, you wouldn't stop me. Wheeler looked into the distance with flickering eyes. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Magneto looked at Wheeler and noticed the confusion that flashed in Wheeler's eyes, and said, It seems that you still haven't found your position and still don't know what to do. After a pause, he suddenly laughed. Don't deceive yourself, Wheeler. You can save me on the grounds that mutants need you. Why can't you stand up on the grounds that mutants need you? You are stronger than you think. Wheeler raised his eyebrows and suddenly smiled. I think it's good now. I don't have such a strong sense of responsibility as you old people. Magneto looked into the distance, as if looking into the future. But we will all die? Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after tomorrow. What will happen to the mutants then? What will happen to School X? Wheeler was silent for a moment, just thinking about the future, and his heart was deeply moved. Haha, Magneto suddenly laughed out loud. Are you interested in coming to my place? Maybe after staying for a while, you will find that you are more suitable for me. Wheeler raised his eyebrows and temporarily suppressed the thoughts that surged in his heart. Not interested. Magneto recovered some of his strength, supported his knees with his hands and slowly stood up, smiling. I really envy Charles for finding such an excellent child like you. As he said, he raised his palm slightly, and some metal floated from a distance. After wrapping around the saber-toothed tiger, the two slowly flew up. Magneto nodded to Wheeler and said, Wheeler, stay the way you are now, don't lose yourself, and do what you want to do most. Also, thank you this time. After saying that, Magneto took the saber-toothed tiger and flew into the sky and quickly disappeared. Watching the two people leave, the stunned Wheeler came back to his senses and murmured in a low voice, "Should we say that we are good friends? Even the words we say are exactly the same," Wheeler complained, and heard everyone calling his name anxiously on the communicator, and his heart warmed. "I'm fine, you go back to school first, I'll go back by myself," Wheeler responded and stood there for a long time. If Professor X and Magneto died, without the protection and leadership of the two, what would happen to these people in the school and other mutants? Perhaps, he really had to do something for mutants. This might be the reason why he came to this world and became a mutant. A thought flashed through Wheeler's mind, and blue light wings appeared, rushing straight into the sky with a tiny burst. A moment later, when Wheeler returned to school, Logan and the others had already reported their mission in Professor X's office. Wheeler walked into the office and saw that everyone looked a little embarrassed. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you all right?" Wheeler laughed, closed the door, and stood by the door. "Fortunately, some people just got some scratches." Ororo pointed at her chin, looking a little depressed. Only she and Scott were injured. Logan and Murat had the ability to heal themselves. Although their injuries were more serious than theirs, they had recovered long ago. The three members of Factor X, with Katie's ability, were not injured at all, which made them look at these young X-Men with new eyes. Logan took out a cigar and bit it in his mouth. Under the gentle gaze of Professor X, he pinched it between his fingers without leaving any trace. Then he asked Wheeler, "Wheeler, what's going on over there? Is it Magneto?" Wheeler nodded and said, "Yes, he also has a mutant machine over there." After saying that, Wheeler frowned. "What's going on over there? If Magneto is here with me, who activated the machine over there?" Katie immediately said, "It's a mutant girl. We rescued her. Is it the little rascal?" A question emerged in Wheeler's mind. Ororo looked distressed and said slowly, "Her name is Mary. Magneto found her half a month ago and persuaded her to join the Brotherhood. She has the mutant ability to quickly absorb other people's abilities through skin contact. It was indeed the little rascal." A sudden realization flashed in Wheeler's eyes. According to her, Magneto gave her the power in advance, so she could activate the mutant machine. At this point, Aurora paused and sighed, but Magneto didn't tell her that using the machine might cost her her life. The little rascal was fooled, so he voluntarily activated the machine? Weller couldn't help but chuckle. "Weller," Ororo glared at Weller and said, "This is not funny, sorry, I just remembered some other interesting things." Weller waved his hand and turned to Professor X and said, "Sorry, Professor, Magneto escaped." Professor X nodded, but looked at Weller deeply. "So, the mission tonight is over, right?" Murat ran towards Weller, laughing like a Shiba Inu, and said in a mean way, "Weller, give me some energy so that I can return to my human form." Until now, he has not been able to return to his human form because of the virus after his transformation, and needs Weller's help. Weller yawned, "I'm tired today, let's do it tomorrow. Then I'll keep watch for you." Murat laughed. Weller's eyes jumped. "No need." Murat grinned, "Yes, I'm your loyal servant." "Oh, please. That's disgusting." "Murat, don't say you are an X-Man in the future." Tisk tisk. Everyone looked at Murat with disgust. Weller shuddered, "Is it not enough for me to strengthen you?" Hearing this, Murat proudly shook his tail. "Look, it's the same for men and women. As long as you can lick, you will always achieve your goal." Chapter 71, Aftermath. The United Nations Summit was attacked mysteriously. The United Nations Summit, the U.S. government lost face. A large number of countries expressed their dissatisfaction with the summit and the U.S. government. Exploring the mysterious attack on the United Nations Summit, was it mutants? Or aliens? The next day, almost all the news reported the attack on the United Nations Summit last night. Although most people don't know who launched the attack, or even how the attack was carried out, and there are no photos, this does not prevent these media from joining in this news carnival. After all, only some blurry, unclear photos, coupled with some gimmicks and so-called analysis, can make the sales of newspapers and the number of online clicks soar. For those very few people who know a little bit of the truth, they are still frightened by what happened last night. Magneto, the deadly radiation that causes genetic mutations. I can't imagine what terrible consequences would have been if the X-Men hadn't stopped Magneto's attack last night. Through this attack, these people have a new understanding of mutants and the threat of Magneto. And yesterday's attack made this United Nations Summit a joke, and the US government also became a joke. Although the government has done its best to appease the representatives of various countries and even set a new date for the summit, it is uncertain how many national representatives or heads of state will be able to come at that time. After all, some countries that are already dissatisfied with them even suspect that the attack last night was an attempt by the government to get rid of them. For a time, the situation was turbulent. But for mutants, there are also good things. The first thing is that the Mutant Registration Act has been temporarily postponed. No one can ignore Magneto's threats. The enactment of this bill that angered the mutant community has become Magneto's new target of attack. The second thing is that in order to appease the mutant community, the government has accelerated the establishment of the Department of Mutant Affairs and made Hank from X School the minister to deal with the increasing number of mutant incidents recently. Finally, after a week, the impact of the attack has finally begun to subside with the efforts of the government. X School, Hank's office. Hank packed up his office supplies, feeling deeply reluctant and worried about his future work. Although becoming the head of the Mutant Affairs Department is good for the school and mutants, he has been in the school for so many years, and he is reluctant to leave the school and those lovely children all of a sudden. Professor Hank, what will happen to my Chinese class if you leave? Wheeler wailed. How can he slack off happily? How can he communicate happily with Hank in Chinese? Hank paused, his expression a little stiff. Chinese class. When he thought of the classes he had taken during this period, he didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Wheeler could always use his profound Chinese skills to bring the classroom atmosphere in an unpredictable direction, making him speechless, as if something was stuck in his throat, as if a thorn in his back, and fidgeting in class. But from today on, he would no longer have to face Wheeler. Thinking of this, he actually felt a little happy in his heart, and he was not so reluctant to leave the school. He took a deep breath, suppressed the corners of his mouth, turned to Wheeler and sighed, saying, I also want to continue teaching you Chinese, but the work of the Mutant Affairs Department can allow me to help more mutants, Wheeler said in Chinese with a sad expression. Then I can only wish you a good journey, Professor. I will remember you forever. I am not dead yet. With this tone and expression, Hank's expression twitched, but Wheeler still couldn't find any fault with what he said. He took a deep breath and forced a smile to Wheeler. You can go. I have to pack up. Wait a moment. Wheeler made a gesture, opened the door of the office, and let the students outside in. Wheeler explained with a heavy face, they all have to say goodbye to the professor. Hank looked at everyone, and a look of relief flashed in his eyes. These are all people who took Chinese classes with Wheeler. Wait, with Wheeler? When he realized this, it took only 0.01 seconds for his expression to change from being touched to being stiff. Everyone shouted in Chinese, rest in peace, Professor Hank. We will remember you forever, Hank. Should I die now to show you? Hank took a deep breath, waved to everyone, and forced a smile. You guys go out. Wheeler, wait a minute. No, I have to go study. Wheeler shook his head, but Hank held his shoulders. Hank showed Wheeler a sinister smile. Guess why my code name is Beast? Although these kids made a fool of themselves, he felt less sad and worried about his work. Buddy, Wheeler said solemnly, don't hit me in the face. After a moment, Wheeler walked out of the office with his teeth bared. He didn't expect Hank's understanding of Chinese was so good. However, school, I'll leave it to you. Thinking of Hank's words, Wheeler muttered, I'm still a student. However, school. Looking at the children running around, Wheeler smiled. He was very comfortable here and had no intention of moving to another place. After saying goodbye to Hank, Wheeler walked out of the castle that served as the school's teaching building and headed for the school's training ground. He and Bobby had agreed to conduct new training there. Wheeler, John, with his conspicuous golden hair, trotted towards Wheeler. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. John had not harassed him for a long time since he rejected John's application to join the team, indicating that the X Factor team would invite those who met the standards. Wheeler smiled faintly and said, What's the matter? John said excitedly, I have an idea. What idea? I want to build a new team. The fireman. John's eyes flickered, as if he had found a future goal. Wheeler asked curiously, Didn't you have a small team before? It's different. I will select qualified players. The team's position is to be the backup team members of X Factor or X-Men, so that we can also grow while helping others. If you think we are qualified, let us join X Factor or X-Men. How about it? John looked at Wheeler nervously, wanting to get Wheeler's affirmation. For him, it is very important to get the recognition of his idol now. Wheeler looked at John in surprise. John, you've changed, huh? I just think it's pretty cool to be looked at with admiration by those mortals, just like you." John smiled, his expression still defiant. Wheeler shrugged and said with a smile, "It's a good idea, but it's better to get the consent of professors and teachers. After all, there is a certain risk, so you support this idea. There are never too many heroes." Great. Chapter 72. Another iron suit. Watching John leave with joy, a smile appeared in Wheeler's eyes. Being able to change John's mind made what he was doing suddenly have a deeper meaning. This can be considered as helping the future of Professor X's plan, Wheeler whispered and walked towards the training ground. A moment later, Wheeler came to the training ground. In addition to Bobby, he actually saw an unexpected person. The little rascal, Anna Marie. When Wheeler came over, she was sitting with Bobby, chatting quietly. Wheeler. Seeing Wheeler appear, Mary stood up in a panic. During the week she stayed in school, she gradually became familiar with the X school, and she also heard about Wheeler's deeds. The second generation of X-Men, the captain of the X-Factor team, led the team members to rescue the teacher from the hands of the vicious criminals. The person who teamed up with Iron Man to defeat the enemy. The idol of all students in X school. The most handsome man in the school, and also the most polite and popular person. The first choice for all female students in the school to spend a romantic night, etc. There were countless halos on Wheeler's body, and they seemed to be glowing in her eyes. "Mary. Have you recovered?" Wheeler smiled and greeted her. Hearing the sound of building a relationship, his smile became more friendly. Mary nodded, and was a little overwhelmed by Wheeler's friendly attitude. She was the one who helped Magneto and fought against the X-Men. And because her ability could not be used with others, she had always deliberately kept a distance from others. These things made her feel very inferior, and she even felt that others were looking at her with strange eyes. Don't blame yourself for the past. Coming to school is a new beginning. Wheeler patted Mary's shoulder gently and walked to Bobby on the side. Mary was stunned for a moment, and said with emotion, "Thank you." Wheeler waved his hand indifferently, and said to Bobby who was waiting on the side, "Come, get beaten, Bobby." Middle East. Although Tony and SHIELD are constantly targeting the 10 rings, these terrorists are like weeds, and new ones will emerge soon. In addition to the low cost of becoming a terrorist, the bigger reason is that the leader of the 10 rings has not been caught. As long as the leader of the 10 rings is there, as long as he silently supports behind the scenes, the 10 rings will never disappear. But the leader of the 10 rings is very mysterious. Even Tony and SHIELD have been tracking him, but they have only heard of his name. Today, after receiving intelligence from SHIELD, Tony flew to a small town in the Middle East again. According to SHIELD's intelligence, there is a group of 10 rings here. They got a batch of Stark Industries arms from somewhere and occupied this town. Although Stark Industries' weapons department has been closed, as one of the world's largest weapons manufacturers, it has sold countless weapons. This is also one of the reasons why Tony is extremely headache. When Tony flew not far from the target location, Jarvis' voice suddenly rang. "Sir, there is a battle in Millet Town." Tony's eyes condensed and he sped up. He never wanted to see innocent people die under Stark's weapons again. But when he flew to the target location and saw the two sides of the battle, he was stunned. Terrorists holding various weapons and shouting at the top of their lungs, and strangers wearing iron suits. What's going on? Tony's eyes flashed with shock and confusion. Who is that? How can he have a reactor? How can he have an iron suit? A series of questions appeared in his mind. Although the reactor looked like a first-generation reactor that he had long eliminated, it was undoubtedly a miniature arc reactor. Although the suit looked rough and different from his iron suit, it was undoubtedly an iron suit. Unlike the pulse cannon installed on the palm of his suit, the other party's palm extended to whip several meters long. The whip flashed with electric light, flexible but powerful. With a sweep, everything that stood in front of his whip would be cut in half, whether it was the terrorist's body or their armored vehicle. Just as Tony was flying in the air, watching this mysterious man fight, a dazzling red light flashed in Tony's visor. The next second, as Jarvis warned him, "Be careful, danger," Tony was blown away by a missile. Tony rolled in the air, his head like a paste. "Jarvis, thank you so much for this ineffective reminder." "Thank you, sir." Tony rolled his eyes, and he came to his senses from the shock of seeing the strange iron suit. No matter who the other party is, the first priority now is to clean up the terrorists below. Thinking of this, Tony flew to the battlefield. Compared with the mysterious man, Tony's close combat ability may be a little worse, but with full firepower, the speed of cleaning up these terrorists is not comparable to that of the other party. In a short while, the terrorists were cleared out, and the town returned to peace again. Tony flew to where the mysterious man was, and before he could say hello to the other party in a friendly way, the threatening electric whip swept towards him. The feet of the Iron Man's suit sprayed flames. Tony seemed to be pulled by an invisible big hand. He bent his body and flew backwards for a distance. His hands shone with dazzling light and aimed at the mysterious man. Tony asked coldly, "Who are you?" "Haha, Tony Stark." With a sneer, the mysterious man's visor opened, revealing a rough face. The man had a mustache similar to his, but there were two obvious scars on his face. A question slowly emerged in Tony's mind. "Who is this? Do I know him?" Tony said in a deep voice, "Who are you? Where did you get your reactor, despicable thief? Do you think you are the only one who can build a reactor?" The man sneered, his rough face twisted slightly, as if he was announcing something, and said with hatred, "I will take away everything our family has lost, and you will get what you deserve." As soon as the words fell, before Tony could ask, the moment the visor fell, it turned into a flame that soared into the sky. Tony was confused, and he had more questions in his mind, as if a stone was pressing on him, making him feel breathless. "Jarvis, did you write down the other party's face? Do you want to compare and investigate the other party's identity?" "Investigate. We need the most detailed information," Tony whispered, and also turned into a flame and flew up. At the same time, at X school. After checking Bobby's control of his abilities and arranging new skills for him to practice, Wheeler quickly returned to his dormitory. He was going to ripen the golden fruit. Although he could have ripened the golden fruit 2 days ago, because of the changes in his relationship with everyone at X school, he still chose today by looking at the almanac. "I hope something good will come out." Chapter 73 Save Me. The world tree swayed gently, and the fruits hanging on the branches, which gradually increased, were extremely conspicuous. Current world points: 15,790. World point growth rate: 355/day. World point sources: 22:1. Logan Howlett, Wolverine. Relationship stage: best friend, 20/100. World point generation rate: 50/day 2. Charles Xavier, Professor X. Relationship stage: friend, 10/100. World point generation rate: 30/day 3. Looking at the series of changing relationship stages, Weller felt relieved. During this period of time, Professor X, Jean, Ororo, Poppy, Peter, and Katie all broke through the friendly stage and reached the next stage. The world points provided changed from 10/day to 30/day, which was a qualitative change. He looked away from the world points and glanced at the event point statistics in the reflection. No change. Current event points: 660. Event point growth rate: 0. Event point source: 0. Since the last time he practiced with Tony, triggered the event point mission, and got the reward, Wheeler suddenly didn't resist the event points so much. However, this thing may also trigger other effects, so it's better to be careful, Wheeler muttered, and finally calmed down, looking at the only golden fruit on the world tree. Without hesitation, Wheeler's mind moved, and the world point disappeared quickly. When the world point was about to bottom out, the world tree emitted a bright green light. After flashing several times, a golden fruit fell from the tree. Wheeler grabbed it, and when the system was launched, he looked at the golden fruit in his hand and smiled happily. He waited for a long time, and it was finally ripe. With a strong squeeze, the fruit broke apart, and the pleasant golden light spread out, dyeing the whole room golden. "Beautiful. This momentum is different," Wheeler praised, looking at the light ball floating in his palm. Some information appeared in his mind. Self-energy compression technique. "What a straightforward name. Can you learn from Zorro?" Wheeler complained. Although he was a little surprised by the reward, he couldn't help but smile. This is the skill he has been trying since he got the control of his own energy. Intermediate. Although he has been trying, compressing energy is much more difficult than he imagined. Without changing the volume of a ball of alien energy, it is necessary to accommodate twice or even more energy than the original. The changes that occur in it cannot be completed with just a thought of compression. And now, with the new rewards he got, these are no longer a problem. "Why do I always get rewards that are useful to me? It's really distressing, because I checked the almanac," washed my hands, and helped people accumulate a lot of good luck during this period, Wheeler complained with a smile and began to experiment with his new ability, or new skills. But as soon as a ball of energy appeared at his fingertips, Wheeler seemed to realize something and waved his hand to disperse it. This is his dormitory, and he can't blow it up because of his experimental ability. Wheeler left the dormitory and came to the training ground built underground for the X-Men. This training ground is not open to students of X school. It is not only large in area but also very sturdy. In addition, it can monitor the physical condition of the trainees and record the ability data of the training. Regarding this data, an intelligence system in X school is responsible. That's right. X school also has an intelligence system. Although it is not as smart as Jarvis, it is still an intelligent system after all. This was mentioned by Hank inadvertently during a friendly chat between him and Hank. Do you want to record the training data this time? Wheeler had just entered the training ground. At the moment when the door of the training ground was closed, an electronically synthesized female voice sounded. No need to record, okay, I wish you a smooth training, the female voice said lightly and then fell silent. Wheeler stood in the middle of the empty training ground, and a ball of energy slowly appeared at his fingertips. The blue energy of the other dimension quietly stopped at Wheeler's fingertips. The next step is compression. With a thought, more energy appeared and poured into the thumb-sized energy ball. The originally sky blue energy ball became much deeper as the energy was compressed. Success. A look of surprise flashed in Wheeler's eyes. The process of compressing energy was simpler than he had imagined. He even felt very comfortable with it and had mastered it for a long time. Was it because he had already mastered it when he got it? Wheeler praised the system for its thoughtfulness. Next, let's test the changes after compressing the energy, Wheeler whispered, and the blue energy on his fingertips disappeared. In the next few minutes, various sounds continued to ring out in the training room. When all the sounds disappeared, Wheeler walked out of the training room with a thoughtful look on his face. With my current control of the alien energy, I can compress the energy at most twice. But if I want to use the alien energy in battle as smoothly as before, I can only compress it once. If I compress it twice, there will be a delay in use due to the extended compression time, which is not a good thing in battle. Thinking of this, Wheeler let out a long breath and a smile appeared on his face. Don't underestimate the compression once, but it is a leap forward in his strength improvement. If you use an analogy, it's like Tony's reactor has undergone a qualitative upgrade, which has comprehensively enhanced the Iron Man suit that relies on the reactor to operate. The energy of the other dimension is Wheeler's reactor, and every time the energy is compressed, Wheeler will have an overall improvement. Even Wheeler's so-called body tempering will have a better effect. I'm so lucky to be able to get this skill from the golden fruit. Wheeler's mouth was grinning to his ears. At this moment, his cell phone suddenly rang. Just after answering the phone, Lee Kyan-hoon shouted excitedly, "Weller, someone is looking for you, it's an angel." Angel, Wheeler frowned, and then stretched out his eyebrows as if he remembered something. If it is an angel, then it can only be the angel Warren who met by chance a long time ago. He remembered that last time, Warren said he would come to the school to see him. It's been so long, I almost forgot about it, Wheeler muttered, and then said, "Where's he?" "On the basketball court, I'll be there soon," Wheeler said, and hung up the phone. On the other side, on the basketball court of X school, a large number of students gathered here, surrounding the angel Warren in the center. Warren was at a loss, even terrified. He could feel that these people had no ill intentions, but as a person with social anxiety, he didn't know how to respond to so many people asking him questions. So he was a little scared. At this moment, he saw Wheeler and couldn't help shouting, "Wheeler, save me." Chapter 74 Superhero, Morning Whip. Half an hour later, in Professor X's office, Warren sat on the sofa somewhat uneasily, as if waiting for trial. "So, you ran away from home?" Wheeler raised his eyebrows, somewhat surprised that Warren would make such a choice. Warren hurriedly said, "I left a note." He was afraid that the X school would not accept him because of this reason. Although he had just been in the school for less than an hour, he had already liked the atmosphere here. Everyone who saw him did not show disgust, but all marveled at his pair of wings, as if he had become a real angel here. Note, Wheeler patted his forehead and said, "Have you really thought about staying in school?" Warren nodded firmly. "I never want to go back to that cage again." Warren's family has a huge fortune, and he, as the heir, is a mutant. His father has always been ashamed of his identity. He is not allowed to see anyone, and is not allowed to go out of the house. Every day he faces only the courses he must complete and the teachers who teach him. No socializing, no entertainment, no friends. He is like being in prison. Since the last time he had a quarrel with his father and spread his wings to leave the cage-like home, he fell in love with flying. Finally, after enduring for a while, he could no longer hold back his yearning for freedom. Thinking of the school mentioned by Wheeler, he looked up some information about X school, left a note saying "I'm flying away," and flew to X school with his own belongings. Wheeler looked at Professor X, waiting for his decision. After all, Warren's identity is not simple. His family is super rich, one of the top 500 in the world. Professor X looked at Warren with his usual gentle eyes. X school has no reason to reject a child in need of help. Warren's face showed surprise. Wheeler smiled and stretched out his hand to Warren. "Welcome to X school." "Thank you." Warren was a little excited. Wheeler smiled and said, "By the way, because of your beautiful wings, you will still receive attention in school for a while, but they have no ill intentions, you just need to get used to it." Warren's expression was a little stiff. "Do I need to communicate with them?" Wheeler was stunned for a moment, and then he understood. This child is a social phobia. So, he gently patted Warren's shoulder and smiled. "If you don't want to, you can learn from those cool-faced handsome guys on TV and put on a poker face." "Wheeler," Professor X said helplessly, "Warren needs to overcome his fear of social interaction, not avoid it. Before overcoming it, you can also choose to avoid it temporarily and give yourself some buffer time." "Right." Wheeler winked at the professor. Professor X shook his head helplessly, looked down at the documents on the desk, and said to Wheeler, "Take Warren to get familiar with the school and ask the dormitory administrator to arrange his accommodation." "No problem," Wheeler responded and took Warren out of the office. Malibu, Tony's home. In the laboratory, Tony's arms kept waving, using the laboratory's stereoscopic images to play Tetris carelessly, but his mind was thinking about a mysterious man he met in the Middle East. With Jarvis's ability, he has already investigated a lot of information about a mysterious man, enough for Tony to have a general understanding of him. Ivan Vanko, son of Anton Vanko. Anton Vanko was a scientist who had participated in his father Howard Stark's experimental project a long time ago. And that experimental project was the arc reactor. Because Anton Vanko secretly reached a deal with the Soviet military, he was accused of espionage by the United States and expelled from the country. After returning to the Soviet Union, Anton Vanko was abandoned by the Soviet Union because he could not independently manufacture the arc reactor, and the deal with the Soviet military failed. Despicable thieves, take back everything that should belong to their family. This bastard didn't think that the arc reactor was made by his spy, and Stark plagiarized their research, so he came for revenge? Damn it, you are the thieves. For some reason, after knowing Ivan Vanko's information, he didn't feel relieved at all, but instead a haze that could not be dispelled appeared in his heart. Tony irritably waved away the three-dimensional image in front of him and walked out of the laboratory. A few days later, a piece of news swept the world and shocked everyone. Iron Man is no longer the only one. Tony Stark fell from the altar. Iron Man's suit technology leaked? New superhero, sang Whip. What? Listening to Lee Kyan-hoon reading the news, Wheeler was shocked. He put down the cutlery in his hand and took Lee Kyan-hoon's mobile phone to read it. The rough Iron Man suit and the iconic electric whip were the sang Whip in his memory, but how did this guy become a superhero? A series of questions emerged in Wheeler's mind. Plot deviation, turning from evil to good? Wheeler's eyes sank. No, he believed that this was the other party's conspiracy. Iron Man's suit, this high-tech equipment that can become a superhero as long as you put it on, has countless eyes around the world watching and copying it in secret. But because of the insurmountable technical problems, only Tony can make it in this world. Although countless people hope that Tony will sell the Iron Man suit, Tony knows how terrible it will be if this kind of thing is rampant. In addition, he has long been determined not to sell weapons, so no set of Iron Man suits has been circulated so far. But Wheeler doesn't think that Sangwhip will make the same choice as Tony. Moreover, why would the other party become a superhero? This is what gives Wheeler a headache. How many forces and people will support a superhero who sells iron armor? What will Sangwhip do with all this support? What will he do to his enemy Tony Stark? Wheeler's heart sank. After returning the phone to Lee Kyan-hoon, Wheeler picked up the dinner plate and said to Lee Kyan-hoon, "I'm full. I'll leave first if I have something else to do." Without waiting for Lee Kyan-hoon to speak, Wheeler left quickly. Looking at Wheeler's back, Lee Kyan-hoon stretched out his hand, then used the cutlery to pierce the food, and muttered, "I haven't had time to ask about Warren yet." On the other side, after Wheeler left the restaurant, he hesitated for a moment, but still called Tony. He didn't think Tony would be affected by SYNOPSIS incident, but he wanted to know what Tony was going to do. When the call was connected, Tony's slightly tired voice rang out. "Wheeler, are you okay? What can happen to me?" "It's just a morning whip," Wheeler groaned. "You should know that if that guy wants to do something, this is just the beginning." After a few seconds of silence, Tony said slowly, "I will pay attention." After a pause, he said thank you and hung up the phone. Chapter 75 Public Opinion, Choice. Time is really something that catches people off guard. In just half a month, the superhero Death Whip has become a new news darling and has a large number of supporters. If you say that there is no one behind the scenes to fan the flames, Wheeler will not believe it. In addition to learning from Tony to fight terrorists, this guy has often appeared in public and appeared in crowded places in recent days. Rough personality, kind heart, mechanical genius Ivan Vanko, codenamed Death Whip, has been labeled with various labels, and even compared with Tony Stark by many people. But what followed was that a few days later, Ivan Vanko's life experience was exposed. Ivan Vanko's father, Anton Vanko, was an employee of Stark Industries and a scientist who studied with Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark. The arc reactor is the result of Anton Vanko's research. Howard Stark is a despicable plagiarist. Not only did he steal Anton Vanko's experimental results, he also framed Anton Vanko as a spy and drove Anton Vanko out of the United States, so that Ivan Vanko lived in poverty for half his life and died tragically in Russia. In other words, Tony Stark's current achievements are based on despicable technology plagiarism. And Ivan Vanko, the Whip, appeared in front of everyone with his research results in order to reveal the true face of the Stark family to the world. When Wheeler saw this news, he almost vomited blood. Good guy. While framing the Stark family, he also established a persona of a bullied weakling who bravely fought against evil forces for justice and was an indomitable genius scientist. All of a sudden, Ivan Vanko stood on the moral high ground and fired a fatal public opinion bullet at Tony. So, as expected, with the outbreak of Ivan Vanko's life experience, it caused a news storm, especially after the news interviewed Ivan Vanko and got a positive answer. All the pressure was given to Tony. Tony was also angry about Ivan Vanko's false accusation, because it not only involved him, but also the reputation of his father, who had been dead for 20 years. So Tony threw out a bunch of evidence to prove that Ivan Vanko traded with the Soviet Union to sell out the interests of the country as a spy, and took out a lot of research materials to prove the problem of the creator of the arc reactor. But in the face of these evidences, Ivan Vanko just stood from the perspective of the weak and said with a sad expression, "These evidences are all false. They were forged by Tony Stark. Although I can't prove the authenticity of these so-called evidences, the government must have a way to prove it." When things progressed to this point, Wheeler, who had been paying attention to the progress of the Stark and Vanko incident, felt depressed. Since Ivan Vanko dared to say this, it means that the two sides reached a deal on the iron armor, at least a tacit understanding. Sure enough, the government clearly had evidence, and as long as it came out and issued an official announcement, the incident between Stark and Vanko would be settled, but they chose to remain silent. And silence is also an attitude. As a result, public opinion began to lean towards Ivan Vanko, while Tony was branded as a thief. Stark Industries was also affected, and both were under increasing pressure. The government has received Ivan Vanko's offer, so is it waiting for Tony to bid? Wheeler murmured, then shook his head. It seems that the government still prefers Tony's Iron Man suit, but if the government thinks this is an opportunity for Tony to hand over the Iron Man suit, then they are wrong. Tony will never hand over the Iron Man suit. Looking at Stark's stock, which began to fall again in the storm of public opinion, Wheeler has made plans to invest the spare money he got from the previous missions. At the same time, at Tony's home, Tony looked at the news reports with a gloomy face, and his heart was extremely angry towards Ivan Vanko and the government. He certainly knew what the government's silence at this time meant. But he would never hand over the Iron Man suit. He never even thought about it. "Tony, say something, what are you going to do?" Rhodes was anxious like a top, pacing back and forth in front of Tony, and said irritably, "As far as I know, Ivan Vanko has reached a preliminary agreement with the military and the government to help the country military manufacture the Iron Man suit, or sell the finished Iron Man suit to the military. It should be sale, Tony said slowly. The technology of the Iron Man suit can only maximize profits if it is in our own hands. Rhodes paused, looked at Tony seriously, and said, don't you really want to consider it? As long as you are willing to sell the Iron Man suit, that bastard will be kicked out directly, and the current public opinion and situation will be completely reversed. Then what? I become a businessman selling weapons again, Tony said slowly, and then his voice became louder and louder, slowly stained with anger that he couldn't control. This is not what I want. They want to use Ivan Vanko to put pressure on me and let me start selling the Iron Man suit? They are daydreaming. On the contrary, Rhodes quickly calmed down and said coldly, Tony, they are not dreaming, but choosing. If you don't back down, they can still choose Ivan Vanko and still get the Iron Man suit, then let them trade with that bastard. Tony cursed and got up and left the living room. Rhodes sighed. The temptation of the Iron Man suit is not ordinary. This is a weapon that can change the war situation. As long as there is such an Iron Army, the military strength of the United States will reach an unprecedented level. Therefore, the government and the military will never give up this opportunity. As a soldier, Rhodes certainly hopes to see Tony and the military reach a new cooperation, but as Tony's friend, he respects Tony's decision not to sell weapons. But Tony, you are not the only one, Rhodes murmured and turned away with a heavy heart. Tony rushed into the laboratory angrily, and when he sat on the tool bench and held a wrench, he calmed down quickly. Stop Ivan Vanko's deal with the government? He can't do it now unless he also sells the Iron Man suit. Let SHIELD help stop this cooperation? Captain Blackjack can't stop the government's decision, and he might even want a piece of the pie. But Tony has a hunch that people like Ivan Vanko, or the people behind him, definitely don't just want to defeat him and reach a long-term cooperation and deal with the government. They definitely have a conspiracy, Tony murmured. Although he had no evidence, he just had this feeling. If he has any conspiracy, I have to take precautions. After all, the Iron Man suit and the arc reactor are all related to Stark, Tony murmured, looking at the Iron Man suit in the laboratory. With a firm look in his eyes. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.